The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the organic wine company, ecowine.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeets.com. And welcome back to Thom Hartmann University, to our book club. We're reading today from the last hours of Ancient Sunlight. And this is from page 60. The chapter is Extinctions, Diversity Supports Survival. The consolidation of power and wealth in the hands of a very few rich individuals and multinational corporations has made some businessmen and politicians rich, but it's also aggregating and wiping out resources. We're directly competing with every other form of life on the planet. As long as there was more out there to exploit, growth was possible. Now, as we approach the closed limits of our planet's capacities to generate food and process our wastes, sustainable growth has to be re-examined for the oxymoron it is. And even if nature doesn't kill us off, it seems that we're bent on doing it ourselves, or to ourselves. Pesticide use in the United States is up over 3,000% since World War II. Yet more pesticides doesn't mean fewer crops lost to insects. To the contrary, we're losing 20% more of our crops to insects than in 1945. But because of increasing insect resistance to pesticides and mechanized farming techniques, the pesticide industry has economically addicted many farmers to their product. Harmless species are disappearing, but no harmful insect species has been eradicated. But while the insects, who can evolve through hundreds to millions of generations during the period of a single human lifespan generation, are becoming immune to our pesticides, we are not. This leaves us vulnerable to the poisons that we ourselves manufacture to kill off another species. For example, in September 1997, the New York Times featured a story by reporter John H. Cushman Jr. titled, "Cancer in Kids Increases, New Toxins Suspected." The story chronicled how the rate of cancer among children in the United States has skyrocketed since the 1970s, when we were using far less than half of the agricultural chemicals we are now, to the point now where the odds are 1 in 600 of a child born today getting cancer before the age of 10. Childhood cancer has become the second leading cause of childhood death behind accidents, and is now the most common fatal childhood disease, accounting for fully 10% of all childhood deaths. Since 1973, for example, rates of acute lymphoblastic leukemia increased 27% in boys and girls, and brain cancer is up 40% over the same period. 99% of all U.S. mothers' milk today contains detectable levels of DDT. In 1950, it was found that 0.5%, 0.5% of U.S. male college students were infertile. In 1978, a study found that number had skyrocketed to 25%. And in the past 32 years, the average American male's sperm production has dropped by 30%. Some researchers attribute this to the accumulation of chlorinated hydrocarbon pesticides, which are often intended to render insects sterile, while others speculate that some plastics used in food packaging mimic the female hormone estrogen, and may be demasculizing men and increasing the risk of breast and uterine cancer in women. But that's just the beginning of the problem. In 1960, routine feeding of antibiotics to farm animals was virtually unknown. Antibiotic administration to meat animals has increased so much since then, however, that today over 55% of all antibiotics manufactured in the United States are put into animals or animal feed. This has turned our livestock into a vast breeding ground for antibiotic-resistant microorganisms. The American pharmaceutical and meat industries don't consider this a problem, nor do the politicians to whom they contribute millions of dollars a year, and continue to support the routine administration of these drugs to dairy and meat animals. But that stance is hardly supported by any common knowledge in science. The European Economic Community, the common market, has banned American meat products grown with antibiotics. Why? The research which so concerned the Europeans showed that in 1960, only 13% of American human staphylococcus infections were resistant to penicillin. By 1988, however, the number of penicillin-resistant staph infections in Americans had exploded to over 90%. Muppets creator Jim Henson was killed by such a drug-resistant infection, for example, despite his substantial wealth and his access to the most sophisticated and expensive healthcare system in the world. And it's not just on land. Ocean studies specialist James W. Porter of the University of Georgia points to the explosion of human viruses and bacteria filling the water of the planet's oceans, killing off coral reefs and spreading disease among humans and other life forms. He projects that 20 to 30% of coral reefs are at risk, with a 446% increase in infections just since 1996 among the reefs he has been monitoring off the Florida coast. University of South Florida researcher Joan B. Rose points out that between 20 and 24% of all people swimming in Florida's coastal beaches become infected with viruses, which can cause heart disease, ear infections, sore throats and eyes, meningitis, gastrointestinal disease, hepatitis, and diabetes. About 1%, she says, become chronically infected. Similarly, a sampling of shellfish from New York waters found over 40% infected with human pathogens. And a sampling of water from the Waikiki Beach in Hawaii found that more than a third of the samples tested were infected with human viruses. At the same time, Vermont ice cream manufacturer Ben & Jerry's is suing the government. They want to put on the label of their ice cream that the milk they use is from cows free of synthetic growth hormones, and it continues with that sort of story. So this is just, one piece of the last hours of ancient sunlight.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome to the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Alex Lawson, filling in for Tom, and it is a huge news day. Today, April 7th, Friday. We were going to do an Anything Goes Friday and take a lot of your calls on any topics, but I bet you're going to want to talk about two main ones today. There was 59 Tomahawk cruise missiles launched at an airfield in Syria by Donald Trump last night. And the Senate just confirmed Neil Gorsuch as a new Associate Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States, a lifetime appointment that I say has an asterisk next to it forever. So it's Justice Gorsuch asterisk. And we're going to be talking about all of that. I'm very happy to be joined in studio by Washington Director of MoveOn.org, Ben Wickler, who's going to help us make some sense of this. And also, we were going to talk about resistance recess, which starts next week, and we're still going to talk about that. Now, I feel it's now more than ever. We need to make sure that people's voices are heard.
Absolutely. So, yeah, there's a lot that's happening right now, and what's about to happen is one of these prime opportunities to actually hold Congress to account, tell your representatives, tell your senators what is on your mind, make sure they do not try to repeal your health care again, praise Democrats who actually stood up and filibustered Gorsuch. That was essential, even though he's been confirmed. Democrats put up a fight and demonstrated that it is totally not legitimate to steal a Supreme Court seat and then confirm a lifetime appointment for someone who's under FBI investigation for possible collusion with Russia in his campaign, especially someone who's a extremist, pro-corporate, attacks on basically women, workers, everybody type of judge. And then also now we should be going home during the recess and telling everyone in Congress that they need to demand a debate on an authorization to use military force, because presidents are not supposed to commit acts of war without approval from Congress.
So let's focus on that aspect of it. Just to set it up, and we talked about this a little bit, I think the most dangerous thing in any foreign policy is uncertainty and not being clear. And the United States right now is the definition of uncertainty and not being clear. Donald Trump went in to meet with the premier of China, and he's like, oh, no one knows what's going to happen. That's the statement. 5 days ago, our stated policy on Syria was that we didn't like Assad, but we were not going to pursue regime change. Now, 3 days after the stated policy that there'd be no repercussions, there is a chemical attack in Syria, almost certainly by Assad against his own people, which is something that we've seen before by that regime. But the information's not done or anything. And then all of a sudden, Donald Trump changes 180 and says now the policy is regime change. And then he launches these missiles without 59 Tomahawk cruise missiles, launched it at an airfield. Now, I believe that they told Russia, who
probably told Syria
that they were going to do this so that there were no military casualties. But this is so all of that. And he did it without talking to Congress. And I think that is where there is some pressure points.
He didn't even talk to most of his administration. So it's worth reviewing, why does like predictability and certainty and clarity matter? Part of it is because when you do things, there are consequences to those things. So in this case, him saying that he doesn't really want regime change anymore, that basically said to Syria, you have a free hand to do whatever evil thing you want. And then they did this chemical weapons attack, which was, probably at least in part like a test of whether they could do whatever the hell they wanted now. So now Trump bombs them. And now we don't know what the hell the policy is, including different advisors. One of them said there's no significant change in the United States posture. And another one said this should be a big shift in Assad's calculus.
Right.
And are we building an international alliance? Are we just doing whatever comes into our heads? Who knows? So why does it actually matter whether things are predictable? One, people react based on what they think you're going to do. And then two, if you want to have alliances, which is a very good idea in the world, the allies only want to come with you if they think they understand what your plan is. So this is it freaks everybody out. If you just randomly start firing missiles, without consultation, without public denunciation, what have you, you're just possibly liable to, attack whoever. What the hell does that say to people who are trying to be allies with you on stuff, especially if it's a complicated alliance, which a lot of them are.
And, Syria is a lot of the public statements by the Trump administration on almost everything are, they're as sophisticated as a 14-year-olds who, watch one piece of news. And so that's what I see with Syria. Syria is one of the most complex, most bizarrely, you're allies with people who you're also fighting over here, and we're not going to try to go through it because it's so complicated. There is literally no easy answer at all, and this administration is the king of pretending that there is just, if you just tried harder, it's just an easy answer here. This is going to be, we do not know what the consequences of this are at all.
That's right. So we can all hope and pray that it is what the administration is describing, which is he uses chemical weapons, he gets slapped, he doesn't use chemical weapons again, that's it. But frankly, dropping missiles in Syria is like stomping around in a room full of dominoes. You don't know, if you knock down a bunch of these dominoes, you don't know what they're going to knock over next. And the worst case scenario is that this leads to some kind of retaliation, which leads to other countries getting involved, which leads to the United States being pulled in.
Other countries getting more involved.
Yeah, exactly.
We have geopolitically, Russia is involved specifically because of Assad. Also, Iran is involved with Russia. You have, I was saying, we're not going to try to diagram it out, but just a little bit. Russia in a new partnership with Turkey. So Turkey used to be much more allied with the U.S., and then they decided that the Kurds in northern Syria,
who are our big allies,
were more of a threat to them. So they moved and shifted more over to be with the Russians, away from being allied,
and we have this on again, off again alliance with Turkey that's really complicated. There's a lot of dominoes here. And
right next to Syria is Iraq, where the ISIS was basically formed after the invasion of Iraq, and a lot of the police state leaders under Saddam Hussein. There's a great Der Spiegel article about it. Went on. This is the police state, secret police of Saddam Hussein are involved in creation of ISIS. It is a paramilitary force that definitely comes from the chaos caused by the Iraq war, which is next to Syria and is still active, ISIS is in between these two states.
Straddling them, It's on both.
And now Donald Trump, a 180 in 5 days on the foreign policy, and then launches these cruise missiles in. So now I think we gave a little bit of the complexity. All of it was without any consultation or authorization by Congress. And I think, again, that is where people can really, and there are allies on that point of view on both sides of the aisle.
Yeah. So this is the thing. I mean, I'm going to upgrade from Domino's to saying this is like striking a match in a room full of gasoline, right? And then throwing it over your shoulder. Like this, like we hope this doesn't ignite anything giant. It could ignite all kinds of stuff. And like, if it does, it is so completely on Trump's head, because what you're supposed to do if you're going to attack another country, according to our Constitution, is go to Congress. It's only Congress can declare war on countries. And like firing Tomahawk missiles at a country is an act of war. So this was not constitutional. It was illegal. It was not with congressional approval. And when Obama wanted to do almost exactly this, he went to Congress to get an authorization for the use of military force. And that wound up being like coming up close to a vote and then being pulled because of this, agreement with Syria to remove their chemical weapons, which seems pretty clear at this point they didn't actually do. But like, what you're supposed to do is what Obama did, which is to talk to Congress about it. And that's exactly what Trump just totally failed to do. And what's dangerous here is not just that it might be a disaster in itself, it's that Trump might get addicted to war.
And I want to really touch on that point a lot of what is this going to do for give Trump, if he's going to like the response, and then he's going to want to do more. And that's what's so dangerous. We're going to keep talking with Ben Wickler from MoveOn.org on the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Alex Lawson, and we'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
The crowded news day, and we're going to try to get through it on the Thom Hartmann Program. Welcome back to the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Alex Lawson, filling in for Tom, and staying with us in studio is Washington Director for MoveOn.org, Ben Wickler, and we're going to take a call from Judy in Colorado. Judy, you're on the line.
Hi. I've supported Democrats for decades, and I'm really disgusted with everybody that continues to jump to conclusions about everything. There is no ruling. Nobody knows. Even the UN specified they don't know where the chemicals came from and what happened. And yet everybody ignores the fact that the so-called rebels, really the terrorists that this country has supported for the last, 5 years, have stored them in one of their buildings that Assad bombed. It is possible. And instead of always jumping to conclusions like it's Assad's fault, and I believe it was done purposely so that Trump and Tillerson would suddenly decide they needed to get rid of Assad, because that's been the agenda since the U.S. helped invade Saudi Arabia. We've got to stop this empire-building garbage.
All right, Judy, I think I got your point. It is complicated. And, I don't agree with some of the things that Judy was saying, because, I think Donald Trump really didn't want, he stated that he was going to not have consequences for Assad. But I guess my main take is that we definitely needed more time to figure out what happened, what's going on, and that's what the UN was trying to do. And that process needed to take place. At the same time, I don't believe that there was any sort. It's scarier than that there was some large conspiracy and it's the evil geniuses. It's 32-dimensional chess. It's way scarier than that. There's no plan.
Right.
It's just like random reactions to things.
It's just throwing the chess pieces.
Yes.
The thing with
he's not playing it. He's just throwing them.
So Trump, has like impulse control problems. He's like reckless. He's nuts. There's also lots of people with agendas surrounding him. And which of those people has the power changes at any given moment based on his moods and what he just saw on TV. And that's part of what's scary. Like, there are people that are involved in these long-term plots and strategies who are in his White House. And one day he's following their orders and another day he's not. I mean, that's what all this can lead to, is total chaos and conflagration and disaster. And that's one reason why it's actually really good that Congress needs to be involved in these kinds of things.
Right. Congress adds a step of deliberation, a step of at least having the opposing views being aired so that people understand, because not everyone is going to agree on either side of the aisle on anything on this, right? There are, because Assad is a horrible dictator.
He's a monster.
But this stuff should be, because of that, it should be debated in public. And we're going to keep talking about this and all the other news of the day on the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Alex Lawson, filling in for Tom, and we're going to be right back. Welcome back to the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Alex Lawson, filling in for Tom, and continuing with us in studio, Ben Wickler, the Washington director of MoveOn.org. And, I think the key thing on Syria, but also on SCOTUS and on so many other things, is actually that now more than ever, we need people to continue raising their voices. We've seen the impact that people have in all of these debates, and we really need more than ever now. All of the Congress are going to go home right now, and they're going to have 2 weeks of recess. And during that recess is when we need people to raise their voices.
That's absolutely right. So right now, it seems as though everything is terrible and crazy, but it's worth remembering things could be so much worse right now under Trump than they are. And the reason why 24 million people's health care is not, ready to be ripped away already, the reason why Trump didn't pass a Affordable Care Act repeal, a Medicaid gut, a slash to Medicare, and then move on immediately to other stuff on his agenda, like massive tax cuts for the wealthy, the reason why we actually have the administration in turmoil is because millions of people have been standing up and fighting back against this administration. So we're about to enter the second big opportunity to do that, recess. And if you go to resistancerecess.com, you can find all the town hall events, all the public forums, all the coffee clutches and meet and greets that members of Congress have scheduled. You can find one near you. If there is none near you, you can contact your member of Congress, ask them to have something. If they don't do it, just start your own missing member constituent meeting. And MoveOn.org and a couple dozen allied groups from around the country are going to help recruit people to show up at that event. What we've seen is that when people show up in large numbers, when they do a Facebook live stream from the event, when they ask tough questions and they cheer for people who ask good questions and boo when members of Congress don't answer them, members of Congress justifiably get freaked out. And that is the reason why they didn't just do a straight Obamacare repeal, because they were so freaked out by people showing up and in their districts during the last recess. We're going to do that again over the next 2 weeks, and resistancerecess.com is the place to do it.
I've been talking about resistancerecess.com this whole week. I've been telling people it's my main thing, right? The most radical act you can take is to get organized. So your voice alone is powerful, but our voices together are unstoppable. And we've seen that time and time and time again. I want to spend a second on just why it's so important now when you have the issues of war and peace. So I spend an enormous amount of time critiquing the corporate media, who I hold accountable for so much of the ills. It's a propaganda tool. But on war and peace is where they are the worst. They cannot help it, it seems. They just are the worst. They will show over and over and over again the Northrop Grumman provided, I believe it's them, I don't know for sure, but whoever, they put the camera right on the missile that launches out, right? And they just show it over and over and over again. And it is the irresistible pathos of conflict. Yep. It is what they love. And I watched this in the war in Iraq and the invasion in Iraq, that they just kept going with that, right? Like they couldn't turn away from it. And the people did not yet have the tools, I believe, at that time. There were millions of us raising our voices, but we weren't able to amplify it in a way that I think we can right now.
Yeah. So right now, one thing to note is the level of resistance energy right now already dwarfs what we had then.
It's true.
It is so much bigger. Also, remember, it was after 9/11. So there was a period with like 90% approval ratings for George W. Bush. Trump is at 37%. Bush also had this mindset where he did not care what people did or said. Trump cares a ton. This is somebody who's like, what's the opposite of impervious? Pervious, profoundly pervious to criticism, to protest. He like is terrified by people, criticizing him. And also Congress is terrified. Like there are tons of Republicans who think they're going to lose their jobs if they side with Trump. So this is a moment when standing up and speaking your mind, just in terms of the balances of power, it has a huge outsized impact. And you add on top of that the fact that we have indivisible groups across the country. We have, Move On has been having these 25,000 person conference calls on Sunday nights. There's all these channels that we have to get information out for people to connect with each other and take action. If you add all that together, I think we can stop whatever war it is that Trump wants to start next. I think we can stop it.
And I also had someone from Indivisible come on. I've been talking about indivisibleguy.org, resistancerecess.com. Yep. Again, it's this getting organized. And a part of that is not just getting organized. Find your neighbors, stand with your neighbors. Our power is immense. We also have the technology now. The means of producing media is incredible. I mean, like the cell phones that many people carry around with them can take amazing video. Just always hold it sideways. It's always hold it sideways, never up and down, always sideways. But take videos when you're doing a town hall or you're going into your member's office. Turn it into a story, because not only is it in that instance, but then post it on social media.
Yeah, no, do it Facebook Live. Everyone has it. If you have Facebook on your phone, you have Facebook Live on your phone. Broadcast it, then post it once you're done, and that can go all over the country. That can get on TV. You make tag Move On, so we see it at Move On, and we can amplify it to our million Facebook fans. Like everyone has a TV studio in their pocket right now, and that has never been true before. And it means that acts of resistance, they echo. We have our own echo chamber.
And, on Tom's listeners and viewers are all across the country. I mean, I have states from every corner on the board right now, and they call in. It's important also for people to understand that they're not alone. They're not,
so right.
That they, it's like sometimes that isolation, especially when the media gets on a story and they stick with it.
Especially with war.
Last 30 seconds here. Just again, how can people make sure that they are plugged into this effort?
Go to resistancerecess.com right now. Search for an event near you. If you don't find one, think about it. Create a new event. Call your member of Congress. Sign up for MoveOn.org emails and text messages. We will tell you when something's happening near you. And over the next 2 weeks, you can stop the next war, you can protect healthcare, and you can save America.
On the Thom Hartmann Program, we'll be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We got great content, more content coming up. We're going to have Senator Jeff Merkley joining us in the next half hour.
And welcome to the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading an excerpt from Robert Wolfe's book, Original Wisdom, Stories of an Ancient Way of Knowing. I wrote the foreword for it. Robert Wolfe just died just a few months ago, just this last year, in Hawaii. Louise and I visited him there a number of times. He was in his 90s. And back in the 1950s, he was an anthropologist and sociologist who had been hired by the Malaysian government to figure out why this one particular Aboriginal tribe, the Sonoy, who lived deep inside the jungle, hunting-gathering tribe, why they were, quote, lazy, why they were unwilling to work in the rubber plantations. And he got to know them, and he discovered that their view of the world was completely different than ours. And that's essentially what this book is about, and it's absolutely a mind-boggling book. I'll share a little. This is from the middle of the book. This is page 86. It's finally he's reached the point where they'll let him sleep in the village with them. He says, in time, I grew to know them better. But it was when I began to overnight in their villages that I learned that they literally lived in another reality. When it became dark, people huddled together for warmth and companionship. In the tropics, there's no long period of dusk. It grows dark quickly. The air would become cool, and people would move closer together, reaching out, touching a neighbor, perhaps holding hands. Women might run their fingers through the hair of the person sitting next to them. During the nights I stayed over, they would often gather around me and have me ask them questions. Then they would ask me questions, very quietly and softly. Our being together was not like other social situations I'd ever experienced. We talked, but softly. They did not know how to compete for attention. A few words now and then were all that were spoken, a question or a comment, a simple answer, long silences. Sometimes someone would have some tobacco and light a cigarette, a tobacco rolled into a leaf, which was passed around the group. People might ask each other whether they had noticed that particularly bright patch of sunlight on the side of the river behind a certain tree, or if they had noticed that large yellow bird that sang in the morning. Evening was a time of reflection, of gentle communication, of being together. I never knew their blood relationships, but evening times felt like family. As it grew later, one of the people would get up to go into one of the houses, more often little more than lean-tos or rickety huts on stilts, and fall asleep. Eventually, each of us had found an empty spot on the floor of one of the shelters, and wrapped in our sarongs, we huddled close to whoever else slept in that house that night. The houses did not belong to anyone. It seemed that each of the 4 or 5 little shelters was for all the people living in that settlement at that moment. We would fall asleep whenever we chose, and I'm sure with whomever we wanted to spend the night. Yes, people had sex, but even that was gentle, quiet, and discreet. Occasionally, someone might turn over and bump into a couple being a little too acrobatic or noisy, and there would be a grunt. Or people might move away from a couple that made too much to do about their lovemaking. Passionate lovemaking between young people often took place during the day, outside in a more hidden spot in the jungle, I was told. In the morning, we might not all wake up at the same time, but those who woke up early would lay quietly, waiting for more people to awaken. And somehow, as if by magic, we would find ourselves sitting in a circle, rubbing our eyes, stretching the kinks out. One person would say, "I saw a bird, a beautiful bird." Someone else would say, "Yes, I too saw a bird." "What kind of bird was it?" another would ask. And so they would create a story with images from our dreams. They did not think that they were sharing dreams as we think of dreams. The Sonoy believed that the world we live in is a shadow world, and that the real world is behind it. At night, they believe, we visit the real world. In the morning, we share what we saw and learned there. The story that was created around the memories that 4 or 5 people brought back from the real world set the tone for that day. Sometimes one of the group would take the lead in soliciting input from each person in the room. "How about you? What do you remember?" Other times, the story flowed without help. A few times, no story emerged at all. It was very obvious that when a more or less coherent story was created around the images we shared, we who had slept in that shelter would live that story that day. Usually, the stories were simple. A bird had shown the way to a tree that was bearing fruit. Later that day, some of us would find that tree, and of course, it did have ripe fruit. Or the story was about a bad storm, so people would stay close to the shelters all day, and yes, there was a big storm in the late afternoon. Occasionally, the stories were about things that affected all of them, all the people in the settlement, or perhaps even all the Sonoy. In that case, they would make it a point to share with the people who had slept in other shelters as soon as possible. It might take all morning to disseminate that story to everyone. I did not witness any attempts to call a meeting, but it was obvious that when a serious story came out of a morning's dream telling, all the people in the settlement would eventually hear that story. I learned about all of this very early during the time that I spent with the Sonoy. It was in what I thought of as the first village, the first settlement I visited, that an important story emerged from what I brought back from the real world during one of my nights there. It made a big impression on me because part of the story came from my dream. It was a particularly vivid dream about one of my family's dogs, an all-black mongrel that seemed to have come with the house we rented in the suburbs of Kuala Lumpur. We had tried to get rid of that dog. In fact, one of the first days after we moved we had run over to over the poor dog in the driveway, but he would not leave. We tried chasing him away. He kept coming back. So we adopted him and called him Jaga, which is Malay for guard or protector. I do not remember that Jaga was a particularly good watchdog, but he was around. And he goes on to tell his dream, and then it's just an absolutely fascinating story. Original Wisdom, Stories of an Ancient Way of Knowing by Robert Wolfe.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. All the important stories we cover and the issues we care about are at HartmannReport.com. Members of our community can comment and join the conversation.
Welcome back to the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Alex Lawson, filling in for Tom. Just a great conversation with Ben Wickler, the Washington director of MoveOn.org. I know I've been talking about it all week, but you got to raise your voice now more than ever. And a most radical act you can take is to get organized. You go to resistancerecess.com. You can go to indivisibleguide.org. If there's nothing happening near you, then maybe contact your friends and neighbors and start it. But don't ever think that you're alone on this, because that is one of the key pieces of the corporate media's propaganda attacks, is to slice us and dice us and the greedy liars on Wall Street, their buddies, the interlocking boards that are the defense contractors who profit off of war, who will always be pushing for more and more and more intervention. And the only thing standing that pushes back against that power, against the money power, against the corporate media, against the Wall Street power, against the defense contractor is people power. And we are fundamental. Our power is more. We can overwhelm all the other power as long as we do it together. As long as we're organized, we cannot be stopped. We can change anything. And we've seen that in the Trump administration already. But now, more than ever, in issues of war and peace, we need to have full deliberation. We need the people's voices to be heard. We need Congress to take their constitutional role and demand that Donald Trump bring these issues of war and peace to the Congress, who have the constitutional duty to deliberate and to act on making these decisions. So resistancerecess.com. I am really happy to be joined coming up in a couple minutes here. Senator Jeff Merkley, a true champion, a stalwart champion of people power, of progressives, of fighting for us, we the people, against the big money interests. Jeff Merkley, who just a few days ago spent 15 hours on the floor of the Senate talking, filibustering against the stolen seat being given to Neil Gorsuch. And Senator Merkley is just, he's a true champion. And I'm incredibly happy to be joined by telephone by Senator Jeff Merkley from the great state of Oregon.
And the guest host is
Senator Jeff Merkley is going to be joining us on the phone. Senator, are you there?
I am.
So it's a really heavy news day. Thank you for making the time to speak with Tom's listeners. And just, again, thank you for your efforts with a 15-hour filibuster. I'm seeing on the news that Justice Gorsuch was just confirmed. I say that he'll always have an asterisk next to his name. But can you tell us a little bit about what you saw happening there?
Yeah, this is a very dark day for America. This is the first time in U.S. history that a seat has been stolen on the Supreme Court from one president and delivered to the next in an effort to pack the court. The court packing was just completed moments ago on the floor of the Senate when he was confirmed with 51 plus votes. But after the rules had been changed in order to close debate, also with a simple majority rather than the 60-vote standard that has been in place. And what this does is open up the window for any additional, nominee that President Trump might put forward to be done from the ideological very far right, as was Neil Gorsuch. And it also means that every time there is a seat open, and a majority party of the Senate will look at the question of whether they can use the same tool, that is, to steal the seat. All this greatly undermines the legitimacy of the court. And you mentioned that this judge, Neil Gorsuch, will have an asterisk by his name. Think of all these 5-4 decisions, these anti-labor decisions, these anti-environment decisions, these decisions that will continue to allow the flow of dark money that will be occurring because of Neil Gorsuch in this stolen seat. So will deserve an asterisk, and I hope people will continue to refer to that each and every time such a 5-4 decision comes out. This entire theft of a Supreme Court seat was driven by the desire of the Republicans elected through the Koch brother money to keep that dark money flowing. That's the issue they really fear. They felt if Merrick Garland actually got a hearing before the Senate, he would be confirmed, and they didn't know where he stood on this. They wanted to have a justice who was fully vetted by right-wing groups and where they knew that they would sustain this dark money that's corrupting our elections so that they could continue to control the elections. So that's why it's such a terrible for we the people vision of our nation. Those who want government buy-in for the most powerful, those who don't care about labor laws or environmental laws or human rights issues or equality, whole host of things, well, perhaps this is a good day for them, but in my mind, it's a terrible day for our we the people republic.
I couldn't agree with you more. And just on that issue of dark money, of just this flood of big money power corrupting our elections and the legislative process, and now really the Supreme Court, there were $17 million spent to steal the seat from Merrick Garland and give it to Neil Gorsuch. And Senator Whitehouse brought that up in the confirmation hearing. And Neil Gorsuch said, "Why don't you ask them?" which was so insulting, because the whole point is you don't know who the them are. And now he's going to possibly rule on business that could have a bottom line impact for these people who gave $17 million to install him in that seat. That is just not the way that our democracy is supposed to work.
No, it's absolutely terrible. And if you look at Neil Gorsuch's decisions, time after time, he has twisted the law, he has tortured the law in order to find for the powerful over the individual. We saw this in the frozen trucker case, where the law is designed to protect a truck driver from getting fired when he refuses to operate a rig in a dangerous fashion. But this trucker was fired when he refused to operate the rig in a dangerous fashion. And the Neil Gorsuch wrote a minority opinion and said, well, no, if we define the word operate to mean operating just the cab instead of the entire rig, well, he did drive it a ways to get warm, so we can't say he was fired for not operating, so it doesn't fit. You have to really search for the ability. I mean, he refused to put that trailer on the road. He refused to drive that rig with frozen brakes, and he was fired for it. That was the story. And everyone else disagreed with him, but he looked for the one tortured way he could possibly find for the company. Or the case of the autistic child, where the law was written specifically, the IDEA Act was written specifically to make sure disabled children get a appropriate education, and he twisted that to say all that's required is merely more than de minimis, which is a fancy way of saying a microscopic more than nothing. And we had actually just 2 weeks ago, the Supreme Court looked at that case, and they overturned Neil Gorsuch 8-0. Even the conservative members of the court said that is absurd, but he had tortured and twisted the law so that he could rule against an autistic child getting an appropriate education. And there's just case like case after that. And that's just such a dismal situation, even before you know that he's going to do great, devastating opinions against women's rights to reproductive health, and devastating opinions against consumers who are seeking to use class action lawsuits. We know this because we saw his earlier rulings on it. He created his own arbitration design when there wasn't one in order to keep a person from being able to sue a corporation over predatory practice. This is really a terrible moment.
Senator Jeff Merkley from Oregon, just a true champion, and he spent 15 hours filibustering. And I want to say that from the grassroots and activist perspective, they stole, the Republicans stole this seat, and they got Justice Gorsuch confirmed. He has an asterisk, and a key part of being able to just, I feel, have that asterisk there is that the Democrats, you included in your leadership on this, really stood with the people and fought as hard as you possibly could. And you spent 15 hours making sure that all of this is in the record so that everybody knows exactly who Neil Gorsuch is and why the Republicans stole the seat to give it to him. There's so much news today, Senator. I want to give you some time to talk about Syria and what just happened. I just had Ben Wickler from Move On, and we were saying now more than ever, we need people to raise their voices and demand that Congress is allowed to do what the Constitution says it's supposed to do, which is deliberate these issues of war and peace.
Absolutely. It's essential that before the president undertakes any ongoing military campaign in Syria, that he consult with Congress and seek congressional authorization. That is required by Article 1 of the Constitution. That is required by the War Powers Resolution. I think the American people are deeply wary of being drawn into another war in the Middle East. And so we owe the citizens of this country, even apart from the constitutional issues, a full discussion of the range of options. And certainly the goal should be a diplomatic resolution that ends the war and ends Assad's reign of terror.
So, what we're saying, what I was just talking with Ben about is how people, when recess happens next week, there's this great opportunity for people to raise their voices all around the country and just let all of their elected officials know where they are, what they want, and demand that their elected officials remember that the people are their bosses. Can you just tell us from your perspective in the Senate, has the grassroots raising our voices and demanding, has it been effective in terms of what happened with Trump Care and a host of other things? Do you feel like the grassroots is having an impact?
Not just an impact. They won the battle over Trump Care. I mean, the fact that so many millions of people took to the streets, took to the phones, took to emailing us, writing letters, appearing in the halls here in the Congress, it really rattled the Republicans. And they watched the popularity of this Trump Care strategy drop enormously down to 17%. And that's a sort of normally you have a 30% unpersuadable. And when 17%, you're losing the base, the Republican base that will march to any tune played. You know that it's in trouble. The idea that they're going to pass a bill that would throw 24 million people out of health care and would destroy rural health care, because the clinics and the rural hospitals have thrived under the Affordable Care Act because their uncompensated care dropped dramatically and because we pumped a lot of money directly into the rural clinics. And so it isn't just the individuals who would have lost access. It's also the entire community would have been damaged by closing clinics and closing hospitals. So it was the grassroots that carried that message, made it happen, and just a huge thank you to everyone who's listening for weighing in and being part of that. But here's the thing, we're going to need you to weigh in again because they're trying to resurrect Trump Care or Ryan Care. Neither one of them wants it called by his name, which should tell you a whole lot about just how bad it is. They're going to try to resurrect it. And so we are going to have to keep beating it down. We would love it if they would work with us to make the existing system work better, to have a public option, to be able to buy into Medicare, to take on the high cost of drugs. We're not really optimistic that will happen. I think we mostly are going to just have to stop them from doing very bad things to our healthcare system.
So I just thank you for making it so clear that the people's voices are heard. In the last minute here, it's not just on Trump Care, it's on all of these, that the people need to raise their voices now more than ever, especially on critical issues of war and peace. I always say the most radical act that a person can take is to get organized. What are the most effective ways that people can make their voices heard in the Congress?
Well, the first is continue what you're doing because it worked. Think about leveraging your voice by using your social media to reach out to people in other House districts or other states, because friends and family members, if you write to them and say, this is what's happening, this is unacceptable, please call your House and Senate members in your respective part of the country. That is a huge motivator. Friends talking to friends, family talking to family. That is the most effective thing you can do. And use any association you have. You're a member of a fishing group or a wildlife group or a nursing organization or any professional association. Use your association to send a bigger message, to publicize the issue among the association, and to weigh in the halls of Congress as well. But let me add a third thing, and that is get involved locally. Engagement is deadly to the Republican agenda. They thrive on people being disengaged, and so we need people to run for local office, get on the local community board, to go to a local board and advocate for a 100 by 50 plan. That is 100% clean and renewable energy by 2050. That's real action to grab.
Senator Jeff Merkley, thank you so much for joining us on the Thom Hartmann Program. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We'll be continuing a great show here on the Thom Hartmann Program right after this. Welcome back to the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Alex Lawson, filling in for Tom, and just really an honor to be joined by Senator Jeff Merkley from the great state of Oregon, who is just a champion, a leader, a fighter for the people, for we the people. And you heard him. It is working. Our voices are being heard. We need to raise them louder. We need to talk to our friends and family. We need to get involved locally, run for office. We need all of us to be involved. And I'm going to go really quickly to a call. My call screen is not showing me. There we go. Let's go to Norman in Washington, D.C. Norman, you're on the air.
Thank you so much. My concern is this. I'm an African-American, by the way. In all the major cities, basically in the United States, you notice, especially in Washington, D.C., the African-American community has been moved out in droves. I don't know if you live in D.C. I know Tom does. I hope he would be in. No disrespect to you.
I live in D.C. too.
Oh, okay, fine. You realize that in the last 25 years, we've lost roughly 150,000 African-Americans in the city of Washington, D.C. Same thing is happening in Chicago, New York. Just go through all your major cities. Philadelphia's all the same. Well, initially, the problem was racism. We were stuck in the cities. We couldn't get to the suburbs. Now all whites want to get back to the city. Price of homes have gone up astronomically high to the point that we can't afford to stay any longer. So now we're being moved out to the suburbs because now they want it with all the mass transit that exists and all the other amenities that exist to live in the city. And it's almost a disgrace. We're going to the suburbs, and sooner or later, as they expand, we'll be moved out of there. I see our plight, and I don't know why African Americans aren't more concerned about it, and our absolutely institutions. We're being driven just like the Native American, pushed out. Eventually, we'll be living in Montana and South Dakota or some godforsaken place where you don't want to live. I'm just wondering, why is there something to be said about this more on the airwaves, be it radio or television? I don't hear that much about it, almost none at all.
Norman, it's a great question about gentrification. And, you know, I think the answer of why you don't hear more about it is because the corporate media are probably the owners of the developers, or their interlocking boards. Are the corporate media are not there to expose the truth. They're there to make money. And so they don't tell stories like that. my business partner, Kimon Freeman at We Act Radio, located in Anacostia, 1918 MLK in Anacostia, he's running a program, and I think you'd be interested in this, and he's raising the profile of gentrification that's happening right now in Washington, D.C. He's running a campaign for a displacement-free zone east of the river in Anacostia, where there would be a freeze on property tax rates for longtime residents in Anacostia east of the river, and for small local businesses who've been there for a certain length of time. And, you know, that's one public policy approach that could ameliorate some of the effects of gentrification. And, you know, I think, but Norman, your point is, why aren't you hearing more about it? And I think it's clear it's because the corporate media don't make any money telling you that story. So it's up to you and us together to raise our voices and to make sure people understand what's going on. So thank you so much for your call. You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Alex Lawson, filling in for Tom, and we will be right back. You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Alex Lawson. We've had a great first hour so far. I know we haven't been able to take as many calls as I'd like. I've got a lot of time planned in later in the show to just take your calls. I want to hear from you. I want to hear Syria, Justice Gorsuch, asterisks. But I just really want to thank both Ben Wickler for talking about resistancerecess.com, how we can raise our voices, and then a true progressive champion, Senator Jeff Merkley from Oregon, talking about his work, his 15-hour filibuster to expose the extremists, the ideological extremists that Neil Gorsuch is, but also affirming that it's working. Our voices raised together are unstoppable, and what we need to do now is raise them louder. We need to get involved at the local level. We need to run for office, find out, all the local elections that are going on. That is our duty now. We have seen what happens. We've seen what happens when you leave things to the reactionary right wing. We get Donald Trump and their plan is to just steal health care from millions of people so that they can give more money to the billionaires on Wall Street. That is what will happen, continue to happen. That will just accelerate unless we all do our part, our duty of getting involved in our country, which is ours, and making everybody understand that the people are the bosses in this country, that we, the people, are in charge of this great experiment in representative democracy that is the United States of America. Democracy is not a spectator sport. You have to take part. You have to get involved. And, Thom Hartmann's listeners definitely are the ones who are getting involved, so thank you for all that. Let's turn the volume up to 11 now. You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Alex Lawson, filling in for Tom, and we will be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the organic wine company, ecowine.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeets.com. Welcome to the Thom Hartmann Book Club. Today we're reading from Hannah Arendt's book, The Origins of Totalitarianism. And I've, known about this book, read little pieces of it for decades. I mean, it's the classic work on totalitarianism. It's long and there's a lot of words in it, but for this moment, Elliot Lustig was tweeting recently about Donald Trump. This is back when Donald Trump was talking about 3 to 5 million illegal immigrants voting, right? And he said, Hannah Arendt, in her book, The Origin of Totalitarianism, provides a helpful guide for interpreting the language of fascists. She noted how decent liberals of 1930s Germany would fact-check the Nazis' bizarre claims about things like Jews as if they were meant to be factual. What they failed to understand, Arendt suggests, is that the Nazi Jew-hating was not a statement of fact, but a declaration of intent. So when someone would blame the Jews for Germany's defeat in World War I, naive people would counter by saying, there's no evidence of that. What the Nazis were doing was not describing what was true, but what would have to be true in order to justify what they planned to do next. So did 3 million illegals cast vote in the election? Clearly not, but fact-checking is just a way of playing along with their game. What Trump is saying is not that 3 million illegals voted. What he's saying is, I'm going to steal the voting rights of millions of Americans. So that's kind of a contemporary frame for this book. So let's read from the book itself. Here, this is from page 348. And she's talking about totalitarian movements and how they use propaganda, how they communicate with the public, and the difference between terror and propaganda, the kind of terror that they can inculcate by just kind of randomly arresting people. Pretty much everybody's committed some kind of crime at some point, right? Arresting people, and on the one hand, that's the terror, or convincing the people. These totalitarian movements use socialism and racism by emptying them of their utilitarian content, the interests of a class or a nation. The form of infallible protection in which these concepts were presented has become more important than their content. The chief qualification of a mass leader has become unending infallibility. He can never admit an error. The assumption of infallibility, moreover, is based not so much on superior intelligence as on the correct interpretation of the essentially reliable forces in history and nature, forces which neither defeat nor ruin, and prove wrong because they're bound to assert themselves in the long run. Mass leaders in power have one concern which overrides all utilitarian consideration: to make their predictions come true. The Nazis did not hesitate to use, at the end of the war, the concentrated force of their still intact organization to bring about as complete a destruction of Germany as possible, in order to make true their prediction that the German people would be ruined in case of defeat. The propaganda effect of infallibility, the striking success of posing as a mere interpreting agent of predictable forces, has encouraged in totalitarian dictators the habit of announcing their political intentions in the form of prophecy. The most famous example is Hitler's announcement to the German Reichstag in January 1939, quote, "I want today once again to make a prophecy. In case the Jewish financiers succeed one more in hurling the people into a world war, the result will be the annihilation of the Jewish race in Europe," end of quote. Translated into non-totalitarian language, this means, I intend to make war and I intend to kill the Jews of Europe. Similarly, Stalin, in the great speech before the Central Committee of the Communist Party in 1930, in which he prepared the physical liquidation of intra-party right and left deviationists, described them as representatives of dying classes. This definition not only gave the argument its specific sharpness, but also announced in totalitarian style the physical destruction of those whose dying out had just been prophesied. In both instances, the same objective is accomplished. The liquidation is fitted into a historical process in which man not only suffers, or does or suffers what, according to some immutable law, is bound to happen anyway. As soon as the execution of the victims has been carried out, the prophecy becomes a retrospective alibi. Nothing happened but what has already been predicted. It does not matter whether the laws of history spell the doom of the classes and the representatives, or whether the laws of nature exterminate all those elements, democracies, Jews, Eastern subhumans, the Untermenschen, or the incurably sick. They are not fit to live anyway. Incidentally, Hitler, too, spoke of dying classes that ought to be, quote, eliminated without much ado, end quote. This method, like other totalitarian propaganda methods, is foolproof only after the movements have seized power. Then all debate about the truth or falsity of a totalitarian dictator's prediction is as weird as arguing with a potential murderer about whether his future victim is dead or alive, since by killing the person in question, the murderer can provide prompt proof of the correctness of his statement. The only valid argument under such conditions is promptly to rescue the person whose death has been predicted. Before mass leaders seize the power to fit reality to their lies, their propaganda is marked by its extreme contempt for facts as such, for, in their opinion, fact depends entirely on the power of the man who can fabricate it. The assertion that the Moscow subway is the only one in the world is a lie only so long as the Bolsheviks have not the power to destroy all the others. In other words, the method of infallible prediction, more than any other totalitarian propaganda device, works. In the book, Hannah Arendt, The Origins of Totalitarianism.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back to the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Alex Lawson, filling in for Tom, and I am joined in studio by Stephen Miles, the director of Win Without War. Thank you for joining us.
Happy to be here.
And, you know, we've been talking a lot about Syria and also the Supreme Court, but generally from the side of that the people need to raise our voices, that our voices need to be heard, that Congress needs to be involved in any authorization of in terms of war and peace. But tell us a little bit about your perspective. I read your statement that you put out. How are you seeing this with at Win Without War?
Well, I think, we can absolutely start where you guys left off, which is that the American public should be having our voices heard in this, and Congress should be coming back from vacation to debate and vote on whether or not we should be involved in this intervention. So that's an absolutely perfect place to start. But we should call this what it is, which is a dangerous and unauthorized escalation of war that Donald Trump is committing in Syria. This is the first time that the United States has directly targeted the Assad regime. There is no sense coming out of the White House that there is any plan for what happens next. There's no clarity on what happens if Assad tomorrow turns around and gasses people again. There's no understanding of if this is a one-time attack or if there are more attacks planned. We're in a really dangerous place. And frankly, when we have a president who's behaved as recklessly and as irrationally as this one is, I think we need to be a little concerned.
Or a little more than a little, right? I mean, just never forgetting that this is the president who one of his first acts in office was to send his press secretary out and lie about the size of his teeny tiny inauguration crowd. That's how petty this man is that he officially forced the official statement to be a lie. And now he is recognizing, I think this is to me the most dangerous thing, that he's recognizing now. I mean, he's authorized his military to have much more leeway, and there's been an immense increasing in civilian casualties because of changes in the rules of engagement in Yemen. Right? I mean, so
this is clearly part of a much larger escalation of war that we're seeing from Donald Trump. You know, not only, as you said, he's unleashed kind of lots of war in Yemen. He's committed more than one airstrike per day of his presidency in Yemen. He recently changed the rules of engagement for Somalia to significantly increase U.S. military involvement in Somalia. We've seen some sort of change in policy in Syria and Iraq that has clearly led to increased civilian casualties and a changing in the way we fight those wars. We've seen ground troops, conventional troops introduced into combat in Syria. We've seen more troops sent to Iraq. And now, again, we're seeing for the first time the U.S. take direct military action against the Assad regime.
But what I think we're also seeing is the media has ignored basically everything else that you said, right? Yeah. Just giving them a pass on all of that.
Off the radar, for sure.
And, huge civilian casualties from... now the media is doing what I think is even maybe more dangerous, which is that I have the TVs in here, just repeat, right? The missile launch. And it's this, I saw this before the Iraq war, the invasion, the media just are like, I said, it's irresistible to them. And that, I think, is the most dangerous aspect. That mixed with Trump, because he is going to like that. He is going to like the fact that instead of talking about the fact that he has a 35% approval rating, et cetera, that he is going to get kind of attaboys and accolades from the corporate media, or at least they're going to cover it with the awesomeness that comes from issues of war and peace. And that, to me, is the most dangerous thing, because he's going to like it and he's going to want more of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And if we had a responsible media with the current folks we're sitting in the room with aside, if we had a responsible media, they wouldn't just be...
That's easy. That's the corporate media.
If the corporate media wasn't just kind of worshiping these images of missiles flying out of the silos and the filmed images of what's been happening on the ground on the receiving end of these missile strikes, they were actually asking questions about what he was doing, what the plan was, what comes next, what exactly is going on in this administration, that on one hand they say it is worth going to war because the president is so moved emotionally by what are unquestionably horrific images of human suffering coming out of Syria, yet at the same time committing the United States to a war in Yemen that is leading tens of thousands of children to starvation in one of the worst famines currently happening on the planet. How are these two things happening, and what is the sense of reality going on here? We should have a corporate media that is asking these questions instead of just showing these missiles launching off endlessly on loop.
At the very bare minimum, de minimis, to use, sorry, that's from Gorsuch, Justice Gorsuch asterisk. But in a use of that word that I will enjoy instead of his, is the minimum that the corporate media should do is just say, what's the plan?
Exactly.
We have seen what happens when the United States of America gets involved in military action. Syria is right next to Iraq. The destabilization comes entirely from what happened in Iraq, or not entirely, but in large part, the creation of ISIS from that. That was because there was no plan, because it was just this, like, well, let's go with it. Let's do it. You have to be able to say, and then. If you can't say, and then, you have no strategy. So they have to, at the very least, ask, now what?
Yeah.
What happens now?
You know, David Petraeus famously said about the Iraq war, tell me how this ends. You know, he's often given a lot of credit for that question. I can't think that there's no one right now who has any explanation for how what the White House did last night ends. I don't know if they've asked themselves this question. I don't know if it occurs to them, but we need to be asking that question. Tell me how this ends. You know, earlier this week, the administration was making headlines because they'd changed years of U.S. official policy seemingly on a whim and suddenly said that Assad could stay president of Syria and that was just fine by them. A couple hours later, almost, they're now bombing his regime, and the Secretary of State's giving a statement saying that he believes Assad has to go and can't possibly be the ruler. There's no plan for how either to make that happen, let alone whether that's the right thing to have happen or not, but how they would make that happen and then what they would do about what happens in Syria after that. This is a recipe for disaster. It is a recipe for chaos. And the entire reason that Congress is supposed to debate and vote on these things before this type of military action takes place is so that we can answer these questions, that we can ask these questions of government officials, that it is not just one man sitting at his beach house down in Florida making decisions that set our country on a path to years and years potentially of war.
One man sitting at his what did you say, beach house? Yeah, beach house, who has a tendency to ignore all the intelligence and information and analysis from the State Department. He basically has tried to just it doesn't exist, and literally gets his information from Fox News morning show, and has a tendency to just tweet things. I think Nunes just had to step down from his position on the Intelligence Committee because he was trying to clean up a random tweet that this man did. And this impulsive president, now sees, that the media are covering this in the way the recipe is it's all the ingredients for a cataclysmic disaster.
Yeah, and the corporate media does bear some responsibility on this aspect of it, too, because he's going to get a lot of press for being a quote-unquote decisive leader, for acting. And, there's all sorts of folks out there from the war-loving caucus, the John McCain's, Lindsey Graham's of the world, who are now saying, now Iran knows that America is serious. Now North Korea knows that America is serious. That is not at all what this message is. Right? The White House is spinning a story today that what happened here is the president on Tuesday saw these images from the attack, which, again, any human being would see and would find traumatizing and disturbing. But that their story is the president saw those images, decided to completely change America's policy and take this military action because of that, with no explanation for how, when the exact same types of images were out in 2013, then citizen Donald Trump had no compunction saying that the U.S. shouldn't be involved. Apparently, those images didn't move him at all then. They now say that this is someone who believes firmly that we need to defend international norms and international laws and the prohibition against chemical weapons. When candidate Trump was out there saying that despite the well-established and universal international norm and condemnation of torture, was out there saying we should be bringing back torture. We should be doing worse than the kind of torture that was done under George W. Bush. There's absolutely no clarity coming out of this administration. That is dangerous. And it is truly putting us in a bad situation where America is less safe, the world is less safe, and we should all be a little scared today.
I agree. And what I think we can take a moment. We can be scared, be worried. We can say prayers or take a moment of mindfulness and whatever it is. But then we need to take action. Then we need to raise our voices. Then we need to demand accountability because what he did is actually also, I'm not actually a constitutional lawyer, but I believe it's illegal, or at least he did not go through the channels that he needed, right? It's not authorized. And so we can't allow that to just happen so that all power rests in the White House. This is not the way our democracy works. And so in the last minute here, how can people get involved with your organization? How can people raise their voices and make sure that our voices are heard?
So absolutely. So our website is www.winwithoutwar.org. Folks can go there. They can get involved. There's a host of organizations, Credo, Move On, Peace Action, and others who are out there today with action alerts on this, ways for citizens to get involved, to have their voices heard, because you're exactly right. The Constitution is crystal clear. When we are engaging in this type of military action by choice, and this is a choice, that power rests solely with Congress. And that power rests in Congress so that we, the American public, can have our voices heard and have impact on those decisions. And yes, it's hard. Yes, it's slow. And yes, they may not pass it, but that's the entire point. And the only way we get to do that, the only way we get to weigh in, is if Congress debates and votes on this issue. So folks can get involved at winwithoutwar.org. They can get involved through a variety of other ways. They can simply call their member of Congress, call the White House, make their voice heard. But unless we speak up now, this is going to be something that only gets worse.
Stephen Miles with Win Without War. That's winwithoutwar.org. We have to make our voices heard. You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Alex Lawson, and we will be right back after this.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Taking more of your calls after this on the Thom Hartmann Program. Welcome back to the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Alex Lawson, filling in. Going to go right to the phones. Bob in Montana. Bob, you're on the line.
Hi, Alex. Listen, I'm really proud to have been a member of the class of 72. That is the first 18-year-olds to vote. And I have voted in every single election since then. You know, I was against the war in Vietnam, but when my number came up in the draft, I was proud to serve my country. Even though I wasn't proud of what they were doing, I was proud to serve my country. And I went through life after that kind of thinking I'd done my part. All I need to do is show up and vote, and I've done my share. And Tom has really opened my eyes, him and Trump, have really opened my eyes that no, my service to my country is not over yet. And I'm proud to say I'm now the precinct committee chairman for the 25th precinct here in Flathead County.
Very good, Bob.
I'm working with the Rob Quist campaign, and we honestly have a chance to put, at last, a Democrat in the Congress again here from Montana. He's running against a billionaire that's way outpaced him on the money. But Rob he loves public lands. He was raised on a ranch. He's been through bankruptcy like Donald Trump, but it wasn't a casino. It was the family farm that put him there, and he ended up paying his debts. He didn't leave any contractors hanging high and dry. Slow but paid. He's gone through, in other words, the same sort of struggles working families all over Montana have gone through.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm hoping your listeners will kind of push against the DNC. They seem to be ignoring this race.
It's the Quist race, right? Is that?
I hope. Yeah, that's the Rob Quist race. He's at robquist.org. You can look at his positions there. He's, as I say, I've known the guy since the old Aber Day Kegger days when the Congress gave us the money to build the new library, but no money to buy books. So Rob Quist and the Mission Mountain Wood Band and the Liquid Assets Corporation held this big kegger for 7 years in a row there, and people like Jimmy Buffett and Body Rate and progressives showed up, and we raised the money and filled the library with books. and Rob Quist, that was just the beginning of his public service.
That's a great story, Bob.
Public efforts ever since. So I hope Tom's listeners will take a little inspiration from Rob and from me and realize that showing up to vote isn't enough. If you really want to thank a veteran for his service, yes, get out there and vote, but get out there and get active.
Bob, thank you so much for calling in, for sharing that story, and for your call to action for everybody. I will say, do your best. Do what you can do. Definitely vote. Definitely call your elected offices, the offices of your elected representatives. You got 2 senators, unless you live in D.C., and 1 rep. Call them all. Call all their offices. Raise your voice. But if you're able, do as much as you are able. Run for office. Get involved in a campaign. If you've never knocked doors for a political, a local, or anything, and really engaged with your neighbors at that level, I can't recommend it enough. To really, it's the meat and potatoes of our democracy is talking to your neighbors and organizing people together. You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Alex Lawson, filling in for Tom, and we will be right back. Welcome back to the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Alex Lawson, filling in for Tom, and we're going to go right to the phone. Linda in Texas, you're on the line.
Hi, I'm so glad to speak with you. I have a question. When they impeach Trump and Pence for Russian collusion, which I know they will, what will happen to Trump's appointments like Neil Gorsuch and Commerce Secretary and all these people? What will we do? Will Paul Ryan become president? Or what will happen? And what about these executive orders?
A great question, Linda. And, you know, the answer of the blanking on the word, the list of people in line to become the president is very well established. So we'll just go down that. The president, the vice president, the Speaker of the House, then Majority Leader. I'll get it and list them all out. It's really well established. But it will be a constitutional crisis of basically everything else. If this were to happen, I'm not a fortune teller, so I can't state with certainty that like you say it's going to happen. I'm actually not very convinced it will happen. I think that we're going to deal with this with elections. But if there is any sort of legal action of that nature, it's a constitutional crisis. We don't know. What does that mean for all the executive orders? Are they rescinded? I believe the answer is no. But, it's at least because it's new, because it's never been done before. But then it goes to the Supreme Court, and Neil Gorsuch has an asterisk by his name, but he has a lifetime appointment to the Supreme Court. There's no changing that. That happened. That happened today. He is Justice Gorsuch, and he has an asterisk by his name, but he is the fifth vote in a 5-4 ruling that would probably come down on many of those things. So it is not it's not an easy answer on what would happen. So I'm going to go quickly to one more call. Ken in Washington State. Ken, we've got about a minute here, so please keep it brief.
Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out why we didn't take a page out of the playbook to get Garland in when, in 2016, and how the Republicans seem to pull that off. And that's just my question. I'm not sure. I've been reading on the number of seats that existed in the Democrats in 2016, so I don't know. I'm just trying to educate myself. That's it.
Thanks, Ken. The answer on Garland, the Senate was held by the Republicans. That's how they were able to pull that off. And so, it was Mitch McConnell as majority leader there. And that's how they stole it. They just refused to bring up they refused to even have a hearing on him. A sort of larger question that I think you're hinting towards is why didn't the Democrats, why don't the Democrats use, or let me put it this way, sometimes it seems like the Democrats are the only ones who follow the rules, right? Oh, we can't do that. We can't go to single payer or use this process to get the public option because it's against the rules. And literally every time the Republicans are in office, if it is going to advance the power of the billionaires and the money power in this country, and it's against the rules, they change the rules. That's what they do every single time. And I hope the message the Democrats get is that we can't play by only us playing by the rules. You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Taking your calls in the rest of the hour right after this on the Thom Hartmann Program.
Hi, it's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. We're reading today from Rebooting the American Dream, from the introduction. It's titled Back to the Future. On April 14th, 1789, George Washington was out walking through the fields at Mount Vernon, his home in Virginia, when Charles Thomson, the Secretary of the Continental Congress, rode up on horseback. Thompson had a letter for Washington from the president pro tem of the new constitutionally created United States Senate, telling Washington that he'd just been elected president, and the inauguration was set for April 30th in the nation's capital, New York City. This created two problems for George Washington. The first was saying goodbye to his 82-year-old mother, which the 57-year-old Washington did that night. She gave him her blessing and told him it was the last time he'd see her alive, as she was gravely ill, and indeed she died before he returned from New York. The second problem was finding a suit of clothes made in the United States of America. For that, he sent a courier to his old friend and fellow general from the American Revolutionary War, Henry Knox. Washington couldn't find a suit made in America because in the years prior to the American Revolution, the British East India Company, whose tea was thrown into the Boston harbor by outraged colonists after the Tea Act of 1773, gave the world's largest transnational corporation a giant tax break. But the British East India Tea Company controlled the manufacture and the transportation of a whole range of goods, including fine clothing. Cotton and wool could be grown and sheared in the colonies, but it had to be sent to England to be turned into clothing. This was a routine policy for England, and it's why until India achieved its independence in 1947, Mahatma Gandhi, who was assassinated a year later, sat at his spinning wheel for his lectures and daily spun clothing in his own home. It was, like his Salt March, a protest against the colonial practices of England and an entreaty to his fellow Indians to make their own clothes to gain independence from British companies and institutions, even though making their own clothes or making their own salt was against British law. Fortunately for George Washington, an American clothing company had been established on April 28, 1783 in Hartford, Connecticut, by a man named Daniel Hinsdale. And it produced high-quality woolen and cotton clothing, as well as items made from imported silk. It was to Hinsdale's company that Knox turned, and he helped Washington get, in time for his inauguration 2 weeks later, a nice but not excessively elegant brown American-made suit. He wore British black later for the celebration and the most famous painting, but he was sworn in wearing an American-made suit. When Washington became president in 1789, most of America's personal and industrial products of any significance were manufactured in England or in other British colonies. Washington asked his Treasury Secretary, Alexander Hamilton, what could be done about that, and Hamilton came up with an 11-point plan to foster American manufacturing, which he presented to Congress in 1791. By 1793, most of its points had either been made into law by Congress or formulated into policy by either President Washington or the various states, which put our country on a path of developing its industrial base and generating the largest source of federal revenue for more than 100 years. Those strategic proposals built the greatest industrial powerhouse the world had ever seen. And after more than 200 successful years, Alexander Hamilton's program was only abandoned during the administrations of Ronald Reagan, George H.W. Bush, and Bill Clinton, and remained abandoned to this day. Modern-day China, however, implemented most of Hamilton's plan just in the 1990s and has brought about a remarkable transformation of its nation in a single generation. Hamilton's 11-point plan for American manufacturers is a primary inspiration for this book. It was part of a larger work titled Alexander Hamilton's Report on the Subject of Manufactures, made in his capacity as Secretary of the Treasury. It's the official title. And then I list Hamilton's 11-point plan for American manufacturers. And I'll share just the headlines of this. He starts out by saying, a full view now having been taken to the inducements to the promotion of manufacturers in the United States, in other words, why we should do this, accompanied with an examination of the principal objections, which are commonly urged in opposition. This was Jefferson's objection that he didn't want America to be a manufacturing nation. He wanted us to be an agricultural nation. Hamilton says, it is proper in the next place to consider the means by which it may be effected. So here he says, in order to a better judgment of the means proper to be presented to the United States, it will be of use to advert to those which have been employed with success in other countries. In other words, they're stealing this idea from England. It was called the Tudor Plan when King Henry VII came up with it. So number one, protecting duties, import taxes, now called tariffs, or duties on those foreign articles which are the rivals of domestic ones intended to be encouraged. So number one, raise the cost of imported goods. Number two, prohibition of rival articles or duties equivalent to prohibitions on some things that we think it's really important to make in America. Make the duties, the tariffs, so high that nobody would want to import them. So there'll be a strong
domestic manufacturing presence. 3, prohibitions on the exportation of materials of manufacture. Why provide raw materials to other countries, like we're doing right now to China, to make stuff to sell back to us when we can simply make it here, manufacture it here? Number 4, pecuniary bounties. This is one of the most efficacious means of encouraging manufacturers, basically, subsidizing growing and new nascent industries. So that's just up to number 4. There are 11 points. The rest of it's all in the book, Rebooting the American Dream, and you can find it online.
Hey, want to hear that clip again? Subscribe to the Thom Hartmann Program on YouTube to see all your favorite show highlights.
Welcome back to the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Alex Lawson, filling in for Tom, and I'm really happy to be joined in studio to take your calls. We're going to go right to the line, but first I just want to introduce Richard Allen Smith. He's a writer, veteran, and progressive strategist. Richard, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So we were talking about a bunch of things about talk radio, and I wanted you to come over, and I think today is really an important one for you to be part of these calls because as a veteran, I do think that you have a perspective on this that I just don't have. So can you just introduce yourself to the listeners a bit?
Yeah, like you said, my name is Richard Allen Smith. I'm a writer, veteran, progressive strategist. I work on communications and media relations. You can read my writing at therichardallensmith.com because richardallensmith.com was already taken. I served in Afghanistan for 14 months in 2007 and 2008 with the 82nd Airborne Division, active duty United States Army for 5 years. So that's me.
And you want to go to the phones? We're going to take some calls.
Let's do it.
I thought Richard wanted the real live talk radio experience, and I said, that is the callers. And Tom's callers are literally the best, so it's always fun.
I'm a long-time listener, Tom, so I'm familiar with the callers.
Yeah, exactly. So I want to get into, I think we're going to focus mainly on the calls coming in about Syria. So Omar in Virginia, you're on the line.
Alex, great job filling in this week, and you really educated me. I learned a lot from you, and you're a great man, and greeting to you guys, and thank him for his service.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm really just a little bit upset because I think this strike on Syria kind of legitimized Trump because what is showing right now that he has that presidency now. He's a president, and I think it's just a reason why all these oligarchs and all these military industrial companies and these oligarchs who invest in these companies really order him to do that, because what he does is going to now create an arm race in the region. Saudi Arabia is already getting like $2 billion, in arms from all these military companies, and just these oligarchs basically wanting him to create this war so they can increase their portfolio and they can increase their pocket. And it's really disturbing that we're being sacrificed for these oligarchs and all these rich people for a simple war. And thank you so much for taking my call.
Omar, thanks for your call. I do think that it's just true that I've said, it's like irresistible to the media, the irresistibleness of the pathos of conflict, because it is so real and serious that it just does create that aura of legitimacy or seriousness. And this is as old as history, that, especially incompetent leaders have always looked for that good little war.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's really dangerous in that, one, like, Donald Trump is just as much an illegitimate president as he was yesterday and the day before that in January 20th, right? But the caller touched on a really scary thing here, right, is this whole, Donald Trump became president last night, right? Regardless of the fact that Trump is a crazy person and shouldn't be president, put anybody in that role. And that's a serious problem that we say, like, you are not officially a president. You're not presidential until you've engaged in the use of force, right? That's a very scary precedent to set, I think.
But I think it's real. It's already been there some, right? Especially the media. They always fall for it every time. I mean, they replay, the corporate media, they replay those pictures of the Tomahawk missiles firing out. I saw this, around the Iraq War, and I think it's the true definition of the word awesome. It's the awesomeness that comes with the responsibility of literally life and death that is war and peace. It has that element to it. I mean, you can go back and read Roman histories thousands of years ago where the politicians were not, you know, they didn't have it until they fought in war.
No, exactly. And that's, you know, you hit the nail on the head with the comparisons to 2003 and Bush landing on the aircraft carrier and whatnot. And you've got Chris Matthews literally talking about his package. like literally, like that's how we talk about a president and when he's on a war footing and dressed in a flight suit. I think it just illustrates the need for an antagonistic adversarial media to be asking questions instead of reciting Leonard Cohen lyrics and talking about how presidential he is just because he shot off some unplanned, ill-advised missiles into a country, by the way, where, as Stephen, who was here before, said, there's undoubtedly atrocious things happening. But we're doing things that destabilize a regime that is currently fighting a civil war against a death cult responsible for the murder and maiming of millions. I think that requires a little more than like 24 to 48 hours of thought, which is clearly what this administration did, right? Where, you know, just a few days ago, we were saying Assad's going to stay in power and we just have to live with that, to today where we're launching missiles and saying Assad has to go.
Yeah, the complexity of the region combined with the incredible knee-jerk response here is what scares me the most. And Stephen actually scared me even more because I hadn't even gone what happens when Russia, Iran, they get behind Assad and they say, no, we've got your back. You've got to stare him down. And Assad does something else. Like what? We don't know what comes next. There's no predictability in this administration.
Exactly. And that's vital here, right? Is that Syria at this point is not a freestanding state. They're a client state of Russia and Iran. And there's not a significant distinction between attacking Syria and attacking Iran and Russia now, right? That's essentially what we did. That's why we called and tipped off the Russians that we were going to do this so that they could move all of the aircraft and personnel from this base, rendering the attack completely meaningless. So yeah, like how do Iran and Russia react to this now? That's really important. It's not a thing that we have a lot of insight into because we don't have diplomatic relations with Iran. We're not on the best terms with Russia. So it's difficult to see where this goes for us as bystanders, but it doesn't also seem like the administration that should be answering these questions has put a lot of thought into that question either.
I know. It's extremely worrying. Adam, in, I believe, South Carolina, you are on the line.
Hi there.
Hi.
I just want to say that, first off, the 50 Tomahawk missiles, which cost $1.4 million a piece, which is, very expensive, it is a display of awesome firepower. And so it's kind of just a attack them big so they can kind of see what's coming their way if they keep on doing what they're doing. I think that the attacks were justified on the air base, and because civilian casualties are no one's goal, but they were warned, the Russians, to get out of there in time, and hopefully nobody was sticking back.
And Adam, thank you for your call. I fully understand that there is a lot of room for viewpoints, a lot of disagreement. You see it on both sides of the aisle, right? This is not a partisan issue at all. Assad is a barbaric dictator who decades of attacks on his own people. He runs torture prisons that are, infamous and have been infamous for decades and generations, actually. It's a strong dictatorship. So there's no defending Assad.
Correct.
And I literally can't watch the videos. It is heartbreaking to me. It makes me weep. And I put my hand up because when I'm here and it's on the TV because I can't actually really maintain composure. It was the same when it happened before, right? When we saw previous chemical attacks, it hit me the same way in 2013. The plight of the refugees also, it hits me the same way. And it's to me, the only thing that I can really hang my hat on is that the complexity of the situation, because I don't know what the response should be. I'm not going to claim I know what the response should be, but the complexity of the situation demands more thought, more deliberation, more predictability for our allies. That's where I am on it.
Sure. And the caller mentioned that he thought that the attacks were justified. There's no question that they're justified, but justified doesn't mean smart, right? There are a lot of actions that we could take in any number of countries that are justified that aren't smart for our interests or the interests of the people in those countries. Secondly, in terms of whether this illustrates what he can expect if he continues this behavior, I think that's exactly why this attack was a bad idea, right? Like a chemical attack, sarin attack is horrible, awful. It should never happen. But in the grand, concept of this half-decade-long civil war, that was 100 deaths. Assad has killed at least 500,000 civilians in the last half century, and we did nothing, right? He kills 100 with sarin gas, and we bombed some stuff that was probably moved before we got there. So the message we've sent is, Assad, you can kill and maim all of your own people with impunity as long as you don't use this one particular weapon. And I don't think that's a very smart message or one that the opposition in Syria appreciate.
I also, in the last minute here, it's not even that clear, right? Like I won't even say that you could get any sort of clarity of what our proportional response to what would be, and especially not predictable. Like if there is an attack using a non-gas bomb that kills 100, right? That's what you're bringing up. What if it's another gas attack or another banned armament? What is America's actual foreign policy on Syria right now? And I don't think we have a good answer on that.
I don't think we have a good answer. I don't think the administration has any kind of answer.
True.
I don't think they've thought about it. You mentioned before that the State Department is basically non-functioning right now. And look, there is one answer that we know will help these people that are being brutalized by Assad, right? Allowing more of their refugees to come to this country, which we're not doing right now.
Richard Allen Smith, that is completely correct. If your heart is with the people, we need to allow more refugees. You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Alex Lawson, filling in for Tom, and we'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Alex Lawson, filling in for Tom, and we'll be right back after this. Welcome back. You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Alex Lawson, filling in for Tom. And Richard Allen Smith is in studio with me, taking your calls. Let's go to Violet in New Mexico. Wonderful state. Violet, thanks for calling in.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. I just actually wanted to make a comment on how great a day it is for the markets. Right now, we are seeing a huge boom in the arms manufacturing industry because, as your previous caller said, each of those Tomahawks are $1.4 million. Well, we have Donald Trump, who is about to increase military spending, and what better way to increase military spending than using the old stuff, right? So, I mean, the name of the game is, well, actually money. And I think that Donald Trump is just going to start using our weapons, using our stockpile, and start bombing people left and right. And it's what we need to do for our military-industrial complex, which is a shame. I mean, if people really, really cared about this country, we would not let this military-industrial complex continue. However, Syria has become our issue because, hey, we need to stimulate the economy, and what better way to stimulate the economy than through war? And I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised that Donald Trump's limited idea of thinking has led him to believe that the arms manufacturing industry will allow us to boom our economy. That's how I see it.
Violet, thank you so much for your call. I think one, the defense contractors and the Beltway bandits have an enormous sway in this town, and the profit motive on war is very real. The thing that I disagree with the caller on is that I don't think that there is that much forethought in this. Like, I think that was too many logical steps for Donald Trump. I really do. I think it was it was the exact wrong thing. It was just an emotional response. If anything, he's motivated by wanting people to like him. His poll numbers are in the gutter, and he thinks that this might be some way out of that.
Yeah, sure. I think, the broad concept of the caller's point is right. But I'm with you, right? I think it's far more insidious than someone saying we need to create some jobs, let's bomb a country. The issue is the sort of revolving door between the Pentagon, the defense contractors, and even the uniformed brass, right? You have many generals, most flag officers, I would say, once they retire, end up on the board of some defense contractor or another, and that's how they earn their salary once they leave military service. Them and civilians that are executives or VPs at these companies move in and out of policy positions at the Pentagon. So when our policy folks are coming to these discussions of how we handle these situations around the world, that's the frame they're viewing it in, is as somebody who's spent a significant amount of time working at a for-profit war enterprise, right? So yeah, I don't think it's as simple as jobs, let's bomb something, but it is a legitimate issue that these people, this industry, these companies have this much influence on our policy decisions.
That the military-industrial complex is extremely real, and the iron triangles that exist are extremely real.
The thing I always point out to visitors when they come here, if you go to the metro station at Union Station, or at the, more so even, at the Pentagon, if you get off at the Pentagon metro station, any time of year, you can see what contract is up for renewal at the Pentagon. If it's the healthcare contract for dependents, there will be healthcare ads everywhere. If it's a weapons system, it's everywhere. Yeah, whatever contract is up for renewal, that metro station is plastered with it.
Richard Allen Smith joining us in studio. Thank you all for your calls. Thank you, Richard, for joining us on the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Alex Lawson, and we will be right back. Welcome back to the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Alex Lawson, and I'm going to pull Patrick Gavin from Talk Media News joining us by phone. Patrick, there is a lot of news.
I know. There's never a dull day in Washington nowadays. There's obviously a bit of news coming out about Neil Gorsuch obviously being appointed as the next Supreme Court nominee. We could probably hit on that a little later if you want. I think the big thing obviously dominating, only sort of in the new Washington would that not be the news of the day, but obviously everyone's talking about what happened last night with regards to Syria and sort of playing out both the policy and the politics of that decision, both of which are if not as important, certainly sort of feed off each other. I mean, a couple of interesting things to note about the decision. I mean, for Mr. Trump, I think that this now kind of squarely means that he now owns this war, and that despite sort of his penchant for kind of blaming things on previous administrations or the kind of problems that he inherited, this one now, unlike healthcare or tax reform or anything else, really doesn't provide him an opportunity to blame it on someone else. So it'll be kind of interesting to see exactly how that plays out. A couple of things that'll be notable to watch is whether or not, should the strikes not have been successful, that will probably likely require further troops, perhaps further military strikes, which of course raises the question of whether or not congressional approval or authorization will be sought after or needed. I think that he has the benefit of, very few in Congress are really questioning the strike. It seems to have certainly majority support, obviously not perfect support, but most in Congress are at least giving the president the benefit of the doubt on this one. American allies around the country, many of which have expressed their support as well. One of the big unknowns is exactly how Russia views this. I mean, obviously that they don't support it, but how can this play out going forward? I mean, more than likely, this will hurt U.S.-Russia relations, which is probably surprising for people because this in a lot of ways separates Trump from Putin, who people have sort of always thought of as these sort of natural political allies, for better, for worse. In terms of, what comes next, some of the questions we'll be looking for. Obviously, number one, will the attacks stop Bashar al-Assad from gassing his own people? We don't know that yet. Will it force Russia to intervene to remove Assad? Does Trump have a plan for peace? I mean, this is a political and diplomatic solution that has sort of eluded presidents before Trump. And the real question is, obviously, launching strikes is a big decision, but what's the plan should he be lucky and it be successful? If Syria collapses, obviously a worst case scenario, that that presents the opportunity for Syria to become a real haven for Islamic terrorism, which of course is, an issue dear and near to Mr. Trump's heart. So those are, there's so much to pick apart here about what happened last night and how it's going to play out going forward. No one really knows, but we'll probably learn a lot more next week when Rex Tillerson, the Secretary of State, goes to Moscow. That'll probably give us a better sense of exactly what role, if any, Russia might have in this conversation. They obviously won't take this sitting down. I mean, let's not forget Syria, is their biggest foothold in the Middle East. It's their biggest military operation outside their borders, and it's complicated also by the fact that, Russian troops are intermingled with Syrian forces. So any U.S. strike on military targets obviously runs the risk of producing Russian military casualties, which confuses things as well. So that's a lot to unpack, but there's a lot going on with regards to that issue.
There is a lot of news, and the complication of Syria is the complexity of Syria is just, it's really, really mind-boggling. All of the actors involved and the alliances and they're shifting. It seems like a very sort of knee-jerk reactive response is extremely dangerous. And it is also true that, from my point of view, it's dangerous that this is one of the first times that Trump is actually getting kind of a sort of unified or at least broad support for anything that he's done. And you are seeing that. You're seeing that, this is not being, even though he should have gone to Congress, and there are on both sides of the aisle some who say that, but it does seem to be, the reaction seems to be at least mutedly positive.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that's sort of interesting, and this is, more conspiratorial than anything, but there's long been this sort of feeling, I think, primarily on the left, that one of the downsides or risks of a Trump low approval rating is this thought that Trump would then answer that with military intervention. There's no reason to believe that to be true, but I think that there's certainly a thread of folks who do believe that, and of course that's exactly what happened. So it is fitting into that theory. I think that, and you're right. Like, should Trump prove to be successful, you probably have to give him a lot of credit, and obviously it would improve his sort of standing and popularity. This is, Bashar al-Assad has been a thorn in sort of the international stage for a long time, and so there are plenty of folks, certainly within the American Congress and also around the world, who would be happy to see him go. But but the big question is, you sort of lose your nose to, or was it spite your nose to lose your face, or whatever the phrase is. I mean, even if we sort of solve Syria, do we then just replace it with the fallout from Russia with regards to Syria? Even if this sort of goes as swimmingly as possible, or at least as Mr. Trump wants, with a fallout with Mr. Putin just present a whole nother issue, a whole nother challenge. What if U.S. military targets do result in Russian military casualties? That's going to have repercussions, and probably not very positive ones. So there is so much to sort of sit around and wait for. But obviously, everyone hopes it goes well, given that the decision's already been made. But there's plenty of reasons to think that this will be anything but a slam dunk.
So in the last couple seconds here, this is the news day we have. Justice Gorsuch is now a member of the Supreme Court. You have 30 seconds to tell about that.
Yeah, he is to nobody's surprise because he passed the 50-vote threshold thanks to Mitch McConnell employing the nuclear option. I mean, what's ironic is now senators are talking about how we can still be this bipartisan body and get along, but make no mistake about it. The fact that
Patrick, thanks so much. We ran out of time. That's what this news day looks like. You're listening to Thom.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the organic wine company, ecowine.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeets.com. And welcome to Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from The Crash of 2016. This is one of the very last chapters is titled Green Revolution. Just as America now faces an unsustainable thirst for energy, so too was Germany faced with a power crisis in the late 1990s. Growing demands for electricity collided with the reality that the country has no oil reserves and a strong bias among its people against building nuclear power plants in the wake of the nearby Chernobyl meltdown. Yet the government knew that the country needed the electricity, equivalent of at least 1 or 2 new nuclear power plants over the next decade. So how to generate that much electricity without nuclear power? In 1999, progressives in Germany passed the 100,000 Roofs program, which mandated the banks had to provide low-interest 10-year loans to homeowners sufficient for them to put solar panels on their roofs. They then passed the Renewable Energy Law and integrated the 100,000 Roofs program into it in 2004. The Renewable Energy Law, REL, mandated that for the next 10 years, the power company had to buy power back from those homeowners at a level substantially above the going rate so that the homeowners' income from the solar panels would equal their loan payments on the panels and would also represent the actual cost to the power company to generate that amount of power by building a new nuclear power plant. At the end of the 10 years, the power company gets to buy solar power at its regular rate, and it now has a new source of power without having to pay and maintain and eventually dismantle a nuclear reactor. In fact, while the reactor would have a 20 to 30-year lifespan, the solar panels typically last 50 years. For the homeowners, it was a no-brainer. They were getting low-interest loans from banks for the solar panels, and the power companies were paying for the power generated from those panels at a higher rate, high enough to pay off the loans. It was like getting solar power panels for free. If anything, the government underestimated how rapidly Germans would embrace the program, and thus how quickly power would be produced by the program. By 2007, Germany accounted for about half the entire world's solar market. Just that one year, 2007, saw 1,300 megawatts, and a megawatt is 1,000,000 watts, 1,300 megawatts of solar generating capacity brought online just across Germany. For comparison, consider the average generating capacity of each of the last 5 nuclear power plants brought online in the United States. That capacity is 1,100 megawatts. So Germany had 1,300 megawatts just in 2007 added. In 2008, Germany added 2,000 megawatts of solar power to their grid, like 2 nukes. And in 2009, homeowners and businesses put onto their roofs enough solar panels to glean an additional 2,500 megawatts. Although the goal for the first decade of this century was to generate around 3,000 megawatts, eliminating the need to build 2 new nuclear power plants, the simple no-risk program had instead added over 8,000 megawatts of power, roughly 8 nuclear power plants. And because the generation sources were scattered across the country, there was no need to run new high-tension power lines from central generating stations, making it more efficient and less expensive. Meanwhile, as dozens of German companies got into the business of manufacturing and installing solar power systems, the cost dropped by more than half between 1997 and 2007 and continues to plummet. The Germans expect that by 2050, more than a quarter of all their electricity will come from solar. It's now just over 1%. Now, I wrote this book 2.5 years ago. Germany this summer produced 100% of their electricity this way. That's how rapidly this has changed just in the last 3 years. It's really remarkable. Adding to the roughly 12.5% of all German energy currently produced by renewable sources, mostly hydro, but also wind, biomass, and geothermal.
The solar panel program has been so successful that the German government is now thinking that it's time to back off and leave this to the marketplace, which they've largely done. And it's not just leaving it to the marketplace. They had to reinvent their grid. There's to be a smart grid to handle all the added electricity that all these solar panels were producing. They have too much electricity now in Germany. Germany is now considering incentives to its world-famous domestic auto industry to manufacture flex-fuel plug-in hybrid automobiles that can get over 500 miles per gallon of strategic gasoline, boosted by domestically produced rooftop solar with existing technology. Meanwhile, Denmark has invested billions in having more than half of its entire auto fleet using only electricity by 2030. And China is no slouch when it comes to renewable energy. Although the Chinese continue to bring another dirty coal-fired power plant online about once a week, they surpassed every other nation in the world in 2010 in direct investment in the production of solar and wind power. As the Los Angeles Times reported in March of 2010, U.S. clean energy investments hit $18 billion last year. A report from the Pew Charitable Trust said a little more than half the Chinese total of $34 billion. 5 years ago, Chinese investments in clean energy totaled just $2.5 billion. The United States also slipped behind 10 other countries, including Canada and Mexico, in clean energy investments as a share of the national economy. The Pew report pointed to another factor constraining U.S. competitiveness, a lack of national mandates for renewable energy production or a surcharge on greenhouse gas emissions that would make fossil fuels more expensive. The ultimate power to the people is for homes to have their own solar roofs, no longer needing power lines from distant power plants owned by big transnational corporations. And a few countries are pushing this solar tipping point, like China and Germany. Book, The Crash of 2016.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back to the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Alex Lawson, filling in for Tom, and we are joined by Jim Dean, the chair of Democracy for America. Jim, thank you so much for joining us on the Thom Hartmann Program. And we're getting his audio coming in shortly.
Can you hear me now?
Now we can hear you. Thanks, Jim. Jim, how are you?
Thanks for having me on. Sorry about that.
No problem. How are you?
I'm doing well. I've had a couple of days of great organizing meetings in Pennsylvania and actually ended up in D.C. Last night. And, was really working hard to empower a lot of good folks out in the streets that are trying to make changes in their communities and get this country back right again.
So we've been talking a lot today, obviously, with the news about the missile strikes in Syria, also the appointment of Neil Gorsuch to the Supreme Court, where he's Justice Gorsuch, asterisk, that now more than ever, we need people to raise their voices, to get organized. And, we talked about a lot of ways of doing that, but I know that Democracy for America is a key leader in organizing people and raising people's voices so that they cannot be ignored.
Well, thank you for that. I have to say we just released a statement about this action, which of course was really not thought out. Nobody was in Congress was consulted, which is a constitutional issue, and a lot of other things that give this the look of something that's very half-baked. One of the things that we really do need to look out for as these developments happen is, of course, the human cost, the civilian deaths, what we are or actually not doing about the refugee crisis. But also there's something that Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal talked about a few months ago, which is the use of an issue like this, the use of an action like this to try to gain political power under the other agendas that the Trump administration might have. And I think that's a real possibility. I think it shows the moral bankruptcy of an administration like this, but we also saw the same thing during the Bush administration with respect to initiating the war in Iraq. These are things that are sort of textbook type things of a lot of neo-fascist movements in the early part of the 19th or 20th century, but we're sort of seeing that now, and I think it's very important to have a healthy skepticism, and this is not in any way to justify what's happened or what Assad has done to his people. It's the fact that this administration is doing things outside of the process and basically claiming the ground of ruler-in-chief and try to use national security for something that it should not be used for.
And I think, something that we've talked about on just on the issue of Syria is that Donald Trump is still Donald Trump. Donald Trump is the guy who, can't even make a phone call correctly without offending our longstanding allies. He tweets blatant falsehoods about, Obama wiretapping him. He's so then driven to just pretend that his reality is real that he pulls, a huge distortion field. We saw Representative Nunes he stepped down because he was called to the White House and then had to protect the White House and released information in what seems to be an ethical violation, which is why he stepped down. And all of that was because Donald Trump some Saturday morning fired off an ill-thought-out tweet that was untrue and would not admit and apologize for that. This is not the man that I have any faith. I have no faith in this guy's ability to have a thoughtful, clear, strategic vision for using military force.
Well, you, Alex, are absolutely correct in that. This was never the person that any of us, I think, wanted with a hand on the proverbial button. And here we are with a burgeoning international crisis with the possibility of increased violence. And the two biggest protagonists in this are basically two figures who cut their chops in the world of organized crime in terms of their own personal behavior. And this is not a confidence builder, and it gives me great pause and frankly makes me extremely nervous about whether we're going to be able to continue on with a president like this who frankly is not thoughtful and is not capable of thinking through the actions that he takes. Give this to Obama, and Syria was not exactly his easiest or frankly best work. If you look at what was going on with their own chemical attacks earlier, but he really did try to use and understood the levers of power that we had, particularly over Russia's financial situation, and especially their dictators, Vladimir Putin's financial situation, most of his money of which, of course, is in foreign countries. So there are a lot of levers to pull here. We've just spent a lot of money on something where we don't really know if there was any efficacy to it. Maybe there was, but this is really, a pinprick. They may have accused Obama of that, but frankly, this isn't going to change the landscape of what's going on. It's not going to make Assad a better human being. So what's the long-term game plan in? And we're asking that of a guy who's never had a long-term game plan in his life.
Jim, what is DFA doing in the upcoming recess, and what are your next few steps as a leader in the resistance movement?
Well, our feeling now is we have a number of opportunities. First of all, in this recess, we will be joining with a number of other folks to encourage our folks to be at town halls, to be having their voices heard. Certainly that was very, very successful in making sure that this repeal of the Affordable Health Care Act did not go through. And we need to be back there again, questioning these people about what Trump's foreign policy is, questioning these folks about Neil Gorsuch and the rights of women and the rights of employees, and questioning a lot of the other things that these senators and Congress people apparently think are good ideas in terms of getting rid of the rights of workers, the rights of taxpayers, and the rights of a whole lot of other folks out there, and particularly with respect to Sessions, and what he's going to be trying to doing with police departments. So town halls are a great opportunity. The second thing we're working on is we have an election, or there are elections going on, I think, every single week this month of April. There are municipal elections. They're happening all over the country. Some of them are these special elections, as you probably talked about, Alex. These are terrific opportunities for us to call other members and other voters to get them to the polls in these districts. These folks have real shots at winning. Ossoff, who is polling quite far ahead of his opposition, is going for all of it. He's not going for just the top two thing. He wants 50 plus 1. I think that's a good way to approach this race. And any one of these victories right now, or victory in any one of these races, is really going to turn tail, or have the Republican caucus turn tail from some of the excesses of the past. So that's a chance to make that happen right now. So we have electoral opportunities. We have these town hall opportunities, and, of course, all of the things that we need to be doing to making our cities stronger and better as the last defenses against what the Trump administration is trying to do.
So where can people get more information about Democracy for America? Plug into resistance around the recess. I had Ben Wickler on earlier talking about resistancerecess.com. But also, I think the special elections and especially the local focus on local elections and moving out from there is something that DFA is taking a lead on. I had Senator Merkley on earlier who ended with a very clear call to action that getting people involved in at the local level in these elections at the local level and building out from there is the path forward for the resistance.
Well, it absolutely is. His leadership, of course, is making that a lot easier for a lot of folks, particularly those who have not been trusting of the political process for a long time. You get leaders like Merkley, that gets people out. And I really appreciate his work. We're at democracyforamerica.com, and as well as on Facebook and Twitter. And certainly appreciate anybody who's out there doing this great work and want to be as supportive and resourceful of those efforts as we possibly can.
Jim Dean, Chair of Democracy for America, thank you so much for joining us on the Thom Hartmann Program.
Alex, thanks for having me. Thanks.
So you heard it from everybody today. It is the time to raise our voices. It has worked, but now we need to increase them more than ever. The recess is coming up. We've got special elections. You've got local races. democracyforamerica.com. resistancerecess.com. The most radical act you can take is to get organized, and that is what we have to do right now. We have to not stop, not slow down, but accelerate into this. We have to be clear and clarion in our calls for change. You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Alex Lawson, filling in for Tom, and we're going to take your calls for the rest of the show.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Taking your calls on the rest of the Thom Hartmann Program. Welcome back to the Thom Hartmann Program. Going to go right to the phones to Jenny in Idaho. Jenny, you're on the line.
Hi. I'm wondering what happened to the story about the mosque that was hit a week ago when the executive and the military said that they performed a strike nearby, but not the mosque. Anyway, that story just disappeared. I wondered what happened with it.
It's a great question, Jenny. And, the corporate media has, when I was talking with Stephen Miles from winwithoutwar.org earlier, we touched on this. The corporate media has given a complete pass to a lot of the increased airstrikes, missile strikes in Yemen, in Iraq, and, just really not talked about them. And there's been a massive increase. since Donald Trump took office. An airstrike a day or a missile strike a day, I believe is what Steven said. So it's a great question, but the answer is the corporate media are corrupt and they don't tell the truth. That's not their job. Their job is to sell widget for their corporate owners. Horatio in California, you're on the air.
Hey, how's it going?
Good.
I want to talk. I want to. Why? Okay, Assad. Yes, he's a terrible guy. But Assad is also taking care of some Jews, some Christians, some Azizis, and other minorities. The other side, the Nusra Front, they're all Sunnis. Yes, they're Syrians, but they're Sunnis. Why do we want to put a Sunni government in Syria that believes in Wahhabism and fanatics in Sharia law? Just imagine this. If they win, they'll put Sharia law and all the rest of the people like the Alawites, the Azizis, and they're going to be beheaded. Can somebody tell me why do we want a Sunni government there?
Horatio, it's a great question about the complexity of what's going on. I wish I had the quote in front of me, but I think the rallying cry of ISIS was it Shia into the sea and Alawites into the grave or something like that. So the extremist Salafists who are make up a lot of the different factions that are kind of also associated with ISIS are definitely one faction in this fight, which is a sectarian, multifaceted fight. You also have the Kurdish people who are also involved, and you have Iran, which is a majority Shia country, or the ruling power are Shia. Assad is Alawite, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. And Turkey is a non-Arab Sunni country, and Saudi Arabia is a Sunni country, and it is all mixed and fighting, and they're allied with different countries, Russia, the United States. It is really incredibly complicated, and there are countries who have allies on both sides of the conflict, including the United States of America. And so, the complexity of the situation in Syria is just immense. You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Alex Lawson, filling in for Tom, and we will be right back after this. Welcome back to the Thom Hartmann Program on April 7th, Friday. I'm going to go to Mark in San Francisco. Mark, thanks for sticking on the line for so long. You are on the air.
Well, thanks, Alex. I wanted to just bring up the fact we should really exploit the Republican Party this time around, because every one of their policies, whether it's the tax code, whether it's health care, all it is transferring wealth from the middle class and poor to the top. That's all these policies are about. It's disgusting. And we should really be screaming from the top of our lungs that that's all this party is doing. They're not doing anything to help this country, but just enriching the corporations and the 1%.
Mark, you and I are in complete agreement there. I often talk about it, the upward redistribution of wealth. That's what you're talking about. And it is true. It is fact. All the policies that they are pushing right now would accelerate this upward redistribution of wealth, increasing inequality. And we need policies. We need redistributive policies that redistribute from the top back to working families. You do that through tax and spend policies. Let's tax Trump and his cabinet of billionaires. Use that money to provide health care for everybody as a right, or to build bridges and roads and have a massive infrastructure project that would create millions of good-paying jobs. These are the policies that we need, real policies that not only stop or slow down the upward redistribution of wealth, but go the other way. And my favorite to talk about is expanding Social Security. So if we can get the revenue side of Social Security as progressive as the benefit side, then you've got a really amazingly powerful, profound, and loved program that is fighting against inequality, that is taking, and we all are part and owners of it together, but it is doing its work in fighting the inequality, which I think is at the center of so many of the problems that we see around this country right now. I'm going to go to Linda in Washington State. You're on the air.
I'm getting off speakerphone. Hello?
Hi, Linda. Thanks for calling.
Hey, Alex, I was so glad that Jenny in Idaho mentioned this, but we killed 200 people last week in an airstrike. Civilians. They were civilians. And so 100 people died this week, and I'm very sad for them, and that area. But all the people they interviewed, all the doctors, were calling for medical aid, for humanitarian aid. They don't have anesthesia. They don't have the antidote for this poison. And for the amount of money we put into Tomahawk missiles, which is like $100 million, we could have given them a lot of humanitarian aid. I want to know if and when or how the humanitarian aid is reaching these people.
Linda, it's a really great question. And I think there's Stephen Miles from Win Without War brought it up. There's a question embedded in your question, which is how is the morality decided of who is worth what? So there have been massive increases in civilian deaths in the airstrikes in Yemen, and there's no clear policy there. Why are we involved in airstrikes in Yemen? What is the point of that? That is a proxy battle between Iran and Saudi Arabia that somehow the United States is weighing in on. And by weighing in, I mean launching missiles into a country. How is that in our strategic interest? And what is the strategy there? And if we have zero clarity in saying this is our strategy, this is our strategy, these are the moral lines that we have that are guiding our engagement. And without that strategy, it's just there. It is literally just an action, and that's it. There's no and then. There's no next step. There's no what if this happens. What is our response going to be? There's no predictability that our allies can use to say, oh, yeah, well, we want to be part of this effort because we understand the long-term strategy that is being put in place. The short answer to your question about humanitarian aid is that I personally don't know. But there are organizations like Médecins Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders, who do great work. I'm not sure if they're even able to be involved or getting into Syria because it is such a hot war, civil war going on for so long. But it's a great question, so I'll look into that. You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Alex Lawson, filling in for Tom, and we will be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Finishing out the show and my week of guest hosting with your calls right after this.
And welcome back to the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. We're reading today from Last Hours of Humanity, Warming the World to Extinction. We fight wars all over. This is from the last chapter, chapter 6, titled Staving Off Extinction. We fight wars all over the world for oil, and we don't even need it. That in and of itself is insane. But when you look at a 250 million-year-old piece of sedimentary rock and see that it's virtually barren of fossilized life forms, you realize that this is a hell of a lot more important than whether or not our country is going to fight stupid wars in far-off lands so the oil companies and the Koch brothers can continue to get rich. This is about the survival of life on this planet, at least as we know it. To hold back extinction, the human race must immediately limit carbon emissions. There are a number of ways to do this. To start with, governments around the world can simply set a limit on carbon emissions and begin fining businesses that pollute beyond that cap. If we want to make it more politically palatable and throw in some profit for the banksters who own so many of our politicians, we could also let businesses and banks set up an exchange and trade carbon credits. Businesses can buy the right to pollute or sell the consequences of their good behavior. In that way, the banksters get to skim a piece off the top, just like they've managed to do with pretty much everything else. This is our best chance to stave off extinction. However, it's politically impossible, at least for now. Although as the consequences of global warming further manifest themselves, political will for a hard cap will undoubtedly build, just like it did with sulfur dioxide that caused acid rain back in the 1980s. It's rarely discussed in the press, but President George Herbert Walker Bush successfully pushed through a cap-and-trade program for sulfur dioxide, which radically curbed acid rain. It's to buy humanity time in the short term, we may have to settle for a more modest proposal, such as a carbon tax. The concept is simple. Put a price on pollution. Under a carbon tax system, a business would pay, for example, $20 for every metric ton of carbon that they spew into the air. As of 2013, 33 countries and 18 smaller jurisdictions around the world have already put some sort of a price on carbon. In February of 2013, China, the world's largest polluter of carbon, announced plans to implement a carbon tax themselves. And the European Union runs a carbon cap-and-trade system. In 2010, Congress nearly passed a comprehensive cap-and-trade law that would have kept carbon emissions at a rational level and required businesses that wanted to pollute beyond the limits to buy carbon credits on the market from other businesses that were polluting below the level. Though that measure died by a Republican filibuster in the Senate, elsewhere around the world, carbon taxes are flourishing. Alongside the EU's cap-and-trade system, several other European nations are also taxing carbon. They include the nations of Scandinavia, the UK, the Netherlands, Switzerland, and Ireland. Other like-minded countries include Costa Rica, which funnels tax revenues from carbon polluters to indigenous communities to help fight deforestation. South Africa, where new auto sales include a carbon tax, and full-scale carbon tax across most other industries have already been implemented. And India, which has a carbon tax of 50 rupees per ton on coal produced or imported into India. South Korea and Japan have also passed carbon tax measures. Several provinces in Canada have carbon taxes. And here in the United States, there are local carbon taxes in San Francisco, Boulder, and Montgomery County, Maryland. While quietly, business leaders and even Republican lawmakers are coming around to the idea of extending a nationwide carbon tax. For a moment, consider exactly what big oil is doing to our planet and how much money they are making in the process. The 5 biggest oil companies in the world, ExxonMobil, Chevron, Royal Dutch Shell, BP, and ConocoPhillips, dump roughly 1 billion pounds of carbon into our air every single day. A modest carbon tax that would cut their daily profits by about $10 million and still total for them a staggering $332 million in profits every day is something they can afford as one part of a comprehensive energy policy. It's the bare minimum that carbon polluters should be paying, considering the damages they're inflicting on our planet. Pollution costs, like global warming, are called externalities. These externalities also include the medical costs of increased asthma and cancer care associated with 1 billion pounds of pollution being burned into the air above our communities every single day. They include the costs of ecological devastation caused when oil rigs explode in the Gulf of Mexico or tankers run aground and spill open off the coast of Alaska. They also include the military costs of deploying armies around the world to ensure that the oil spigots in hostile regions keep flowing and the shipping lanes remain open. And they include the costs associated with climate change, costlier storms, rising sea levels, flooding, and agricultural devastation. Carbon polluters themselves pay for few, if any, of these externalities, but instead they try to pass the bill along to all of us affected by their pollution. That needs to change to prevent disaster. When the day comes that businesses know pollution is at their expense, they will begin to reduce their carbon emissions. Capping carbon levels alone won't work. Research out of the MIT Global Change Institute assumed a $20 tax per ton of carbon pollution, increasing 4% every year, and found that it would only modestly curb emissions. This carbon tax scenario falls well short of even the White House's goal of cutting carbon emissions by 80% by 2050. And it would come nowhere close to staving off the projected temperature increases that could take our planet over the extinction tipping point. So a carbon tax needs to be part of a broader plan that not only eliminates incentives for the use of carbon-based fuels, but altogether phases them out and replaces them with new, cleaner energy alternatives. This will require massive government investment in research and development. It's basically calling for a new Manhattan Project. The book is The Last Hours of Humanity, Warming the World to Extinction by Thom Hartmann.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. All the important stories we cover and the issues we care about are at hartmanreport.com. Members of our community can comment and join the conversation.
Welcome back to the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Alex Lawson, filling in for Tom, and we are going to just take your calls until the end of the show. Albert in California, you are on the line.
Hey, thanks for taking my call, and you've been great filling in this week.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, man. I do want to call out the hypocrisy of the Democratic Party, though, here. Hillary Clinton called for strikes. She wanted to take out Syria's Air Force. And I find that so hypocritical, especially for the people who, voted for Hillary Clinton over Bernie Sanders, as if the Russians would help somebody who they call, quote unquote, a communist, as like they would use that one. And that would be, a hinge against Bernie in the eyes of the Russians. But I find that very hypocritical. And the only way the Democrats can really get through to Republicans is to give binary options, meaning we don't need to be for war at all. Because if we take out this guy, who's the next guy? Africa's full of dictators we should be taking out. Why aren't we there?
A good point, Albert. And, Hillary Clinton is on the news currently saying that the strike was good and that more should be done to ensure that Assad gets the message. The response of the strikes in Syria has not been, from the Democrats, from everybody, but from the Democrats has not been one of at all universal condemnation. Senator Schumer, so leader in the Senate, has said it was justified and or proportional. And Pelosi, leader of the Democrats in the House, also said it was justified and or proportional. One of them said one of them said the other. And so you're not seeing universal condemnation by any means on this. And there is a lot of variance in people's point of view on what would be the response on this. So thanks for your call. And it's just, it is, I'm with Barbara Lee, who is saying at the very least, we need Paul Ryan to bring this issue to a debate in Congress, because Congress are constitutionally mandated with making these decisions. And that's the bare minimum. So I'm okay with people having different points of view, obviously, but we need to have a debate in the Congress is the correct place. I am not at all, I will not say that Trump did. I'm completely uncomfortable, more than uncomfortable. It verges into just terrifying fear that this guy, Donald Trump, the guy whose first act was to send his press secretary out to lie about the size of his inauguration crowd, he's so insecure. This man should not be making unilateral decisions on the issues of war and peace, the gravest issues that our nation, we need to have Congress do their constitutional duty and deliberate and make and come to a decision, whatever they authorize. That at the very least they need to deliberate. Mike in California, you're on the air.
Hi. I am having deja vu big time. When chemical weapons were used during Barack Obama's term, he said that crossed the red line, but he was going to wait for the science to determine whether the government did it or not. And it came back that it was an improvised chemical device, and we didn't go to war. And now we've got this other guy as president, and before the science ever comes back, he's already pulling the trigger. Thank you.
Mike, thanks for your call. Again, I don't know anything more than what's been reported in the news. I completely agree that the speed with which, I mean, from our stated position is that we will not attempt to remove Assad, basically no matter what. We know he's a bad person and he does horrible things, but we're not going to remove him. That was the Trump position, the Trump administration position 7 days ago. 2 days later, there's a chemical weapons attack in Syria. The day after that, the foreign policy shifts 180, and then it's all of a sudden it's for regime change and getting rid of Assad. And then, you know, a short time after that, you have the president launching 59 Tomahawk missiles at an airbase in Syria. And, you know, that amount of time is not enough to go that far, to change 180. And we do not have, this is a half of a decade, right? This is one act of barbarity that has happened in a legion of acts of barbarity, unfortunately, from multiple sides. And all of a sudden, this, you know, to turn on a dime and launch these missiles with no debate, that's what worries me. What worries me is the speed and non-strategic and seemingly no deliberation. There's no predictability for our allies. There's no predictability for our enemies. Our enemies also have no idea what the response of the United States is going to be. That is so dangerous. Tammy in Georgia, you're on the line.
Yes. Hi, Alex. Thanks for taking me. I have just two quick questions. One, we have a special election here this month. And how do I find out if there's a Democrat, John Ossoff, and he looks pretty liberal and he looks pretty promising, but how do you find out if he's has a super PAC? And two, during my research on him, I found out the Republicans here are going to try to redraw the district lines to protect Republicans that they think are in danger of getting elected out. Can we as voters do anything about that?
Those are both great questions, Tammy. On your second one, I unfortunately I don't have a universal answer because it's state by state, but you're going to have to look into your state rules and laws around redistricting, but it is controlled by the state house and the governor, so it's really a state government function. That's why it's so critical that we focus also on local and state elections, not just federal. In terms of the race of John Ossoff, I actually don't know for sure whether he has a super PAC or not, but I would be incredibly surprised because he is a grassroots candidate. He just, I don't know where it would come from. Like, what billionaires are going to be pouring money into that race? It's just not feasible or credible to me. And he's got the support of an endorsement of the organizations who I trust to verify that these candidates are, and I should say in full disclosure, I support him. I think that his election would be a tremendous positive, and I've given money to his campaign. But I made my decision by, looking at folks like Democracy for America, who, really go through and and everybody has a candidate questionnaire that they have to ask. I know one of the questions on there, and an important one, is on Citizen United and the effect of money in politics and whether you would fight against it. So, Tammy, I would start by going to probably democracyforamerica.com. And they, I know, are focused on that race. And click in there and get the answers that he's given to their questionnaire. And I think that might help you make some decisions there. I personally think that just the message it would send is so powerful that this special election for Tom Price's seat would go to a Democrat is a really powerful message. Jordy in Washington, you're on the air.
Hi, Alex. Fox News has lots of coverage, and some folks only listen to them. It seems like we need something as an antithesis that's that big, something that we can't afford because we're not the deep pocket. But is it possible through crowdfunding or pleading with philanthropists to come up with something that we can make available to people in those states and counties that get so little other news?
Jordy, it's a really great question and something that's really near and dear to my heart. I own an independent progressive media company, We Act Radio. And, I've been arguing because there are rich funders on the left who believe in progressive values, but there is a sort of, I have not found I have not seen that much vision from the funding on the left to understand that media and the ability to tell our own stories is key. It's fundamental. On the right, they get this immediately. Mercer's funded Breitbart. Breitbart is now in the White House. I mean, they understand just implicitly that if you control the narrative, if you control the story, then you control the power. And it's just, we have the facts and the truth on our side. On the left, the people agree with us on expanding Social Security, lowering drug prices. If we could just, and a host of other issues, if we could just get the message out there, if we could just engage people, it would go so far. But I don't have a good answer, Jordy. But if you do find that rich lefty who's looking to support media, you go to weactradio.com. You can click join the opposition party right there and support a independent progressive media company who we've spent 5 years bringing new voices into the media because, Jordy, I agree completely with you that the effect of Fox News is so massive in distorting the entire debate in this country. And we just need more truth tellers like Thom Hartmann. We need to amplify the reach of truth tellers like Thom Hartmann. And there are great truth tellers around the country. We just need to get them in front of more people. You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Alex Lawson, and we're going to be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Going to try to get to all of your calls on the Thom Hartmann Program right after this. Welcome back to the Thom Hartmann Program, going right to the phones. Joe in Tucson, Arizona. I was just in Tucson. Beautiful city.
Yes, it is. Alex, this is off topic, but more to your expertise. My wife and I were both on Social Security. We bought a house 8 years ago. We never missed a payment. We're never late until November. Well, we've got to be out by June, and we couldn't figure out what happened. Well, Social Security hasn't gone up at all, not one iota. But everything else has, our insurance, our supplements, our prescriptions, everything. So we're going to be losing our house in June. But I just wanted to bring that up, and I'll take your response offline.
Joe, your story is that's just devastating news. It's just not the way things are supposed to work. If you could go to socialsecurityworks.org, you can find my contact information on there. If you can, send me an email. I'd like to get more information. And I don't think that we can do anything, but I'd like to get more information. We have some partners in Arizona, and maybe we can do something at the very least by getting your story out there, because it is not the way things are supposed to be. The COLA last year went up 0%, the cost of living adjustment, $0. And this is supposed to keep up with the price increases that people are facing. And like you said, the prices of prescription drugs, they go up 10% on average a year. 10% on average a year. The price of food's going up, mortgages, rent. This is just across the board. Prices are going up. But because of the way it's calculated and the price of oil fell so hard, there was a 0% COLA. This year, it's a 0.4%, about $4 per month. And this is not the way the COLA is supposed to ensure that your benefits maintain their value. So they maintain the purchasing power of when you claim them. That's what the purpose of the COLA is. So if you as prices go up, the COLA keeps your benefit at the same level as those prices so that your purchasing power never goes down. That's the purpose of the COLA. That has not been the case. You know, there's been 3 zero COLAs over the past 5 years. That means it's broken. And we have one COLA. Actually, Representative Raul Grijalva from your area is a leader on switching to the CPIE. It's a different COLA, a different way of calculating it. But even that's not enough. I love the effort, and we should support the effort to change to the CPIE. I have actually worked my own bill with some allies in the Congress that should be introduced at some point, which just says that the COLA should maintain pace with medical inflation, which medical inflation is going up massively over real inflation at around 5 to 7, sometimes 10% a year. And those costs are destroying people's ability to maintain their standard of living when the COLA is at 0. Joe, thank you for sharing your story. It's a devastating one. Again, if you could get in contact with me by email if possible, socialsecurityworks.org. I'm Alex Lawson, and I'm filling in for Thom Hartmann on the Thom Hartmann Program, and we'll be right back after this. Welcome back to the Thom Hartmann Program. Going right to the phone so I can try to get through as many as possible. Linda in Florida, you're on the air.
Uh-oh, that's what. Hold on, I gotta go get this.
Linda is coming to the phone. Hi, Linda, are you with us?
Yes, hello?
Hi.
Hi, first of all, thank you so much for being on the air today. You've been fantastic all week. I'm going to go to Social Security Works. I'm a person who's blind, who's 64 years old. I'm with my mobility instructor right now. We need so much more work to do on disability rights. I've been a disability rights advocate since I was 16 years old.
Thank you, Linda, for that.
Thank you. I appreciate everything you do, Alex.
Oh, thank you so much.
Bye.
You still there, Linda?
What?
Hey.
Thank you so much, Alex. That's what I wanted to say. I think people are still discriminating against us as bad as they did when I was 16, so I appreciate it.
All right.
And I want people to know that.
Well, thank you, Linda, for that. I'm going to go to Corey in Nevada. Wait, in Las Vegas. Corey, are you in Vegas?
Yeah, I'm in Vegas.
So I was just in Vegas, and I went to I live in D.C. We have the greatest museums around. But I went to a new museum in Vegas that was really awesome, and I want to give it a small shout out. So thank you for giving me the opening. It is the Atomic Testing Museum in Las Vegas. Have you been there?
Oh, yeah, that's not new. That's been here for a long time.
Oh, no, I'm not saying it was new to me. And man, was that a really good museum. I think everybody should go. If you like your entertainment with a healthy dose of existential dread, you should go to the Atomic Testing Museum in Las Vegas, Nevada, because it is a just amazing, remarkable story about how lucky we are as a species to not have accidentally destroyed ourselves already. So Corey in Las Vegas, your call has nothing to do with the Atomic Testing Museum in Las Vegas, but I wanted to bring that up.
Yeah, you should check out the Mob Museum, too, when you get a chance.
I haven't been there. I'll check it out next time. Corey, what do you want to talk about?
Well, I'm a huge fan of equality. I don't care if you're black, white, straight, gay. It doesn't make any difference to me. Live your life, be happy. Everybody should be treated with equality. I'm trying really hard to figure out why it's okay then in liberal circles for the tax code to not be based on the same ideals and everybody simply pay the same percentage of their income, which would actually be equality.
Corey, it's a great question, and the reason is because the progressive income tax is one of the greatest inventions that we have had as in terms of creating a society that works. So people pay their fair share, and society benefits people differently, greatly. And so the wealthier you are, the more you can pay in. And that's just a deeply American value of fairness. But Corey, I'm gonna agree with you in one area. I think that everyone, regardless of how rich you are, should pay the exact same rate on all of their income into Social Security. And that is something that you and I can really get together on, in that you and I agree on Social Security that everyone, regardless of their income, should pay the exact same rate on all of it, including unearned income, into Social Security. And it would be a fantastically fair way to fund that system. We're not going to find agreement on the income tax, unfortunately, Corey, because the progressive income tax is the most fair way of doing income tax. But on the payroll tax, complete agreement. We need millionaires, billionaires, Donald Trump, Ivanka Trump, Jared Kushner, the billionaires in Donald Trump's cabinet, all of them, everyone pay the exact same rate on all of their income into Social Security. And that is just a fair way to go. Some people call it scrapping the cap or modifying the cap. Senator Bernie Sanders has a bill that he's put in. Peter DeFazio's the co-sponsor in the House. I'm sorry. Peter DeFazio has the companion bill in the House. It's the Social Security Expansion Act. And Corey, we agree on that the Atomic Testing Museum in Las Vegas, Nevada is fantastic. And we agree that everybody, millionaires, billionaires, and everyone should pay the exact same rate into Social Security on all of their income. And to do that, you got to support Bernie Sanders' Social Security Expansion Act. And in the House, it's Peter DeFazio. Call your senators, call your representative, tell them to get on board with that. And we've had a really great week. That was the royal we. I have had a really great week with you all on the Thom Hartmann Program. It's a real honor and a privilege to get to speak with all of you. And I'm just so thankful to Thom to give me this opportunity. The Thom's team here, the crew, is amazing. They are what makes this show run as well as it does. I'm Alex Lawson, filling in for Thom Hartmann on the Thom Hartmann Program. Remember, democracy is not a spectator sport. Get involved, get organized, and thank you so much.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeats.com.